Good morning. Welcome to the Budget and Appropriations Committee meeting. I am Danielle McCray. I'm chair of the committee as well as the councilwoman for the 2nd District. At this time, I just want to remind everyone to please silence your cell phones. And joining us today, we have members of the committee, Vice President Sharon Green Middleton, representing the 6th District, and also Councilman Paris Gray, representing the 8th District. In addition, we also have several representatives from the Mayor's Office, the City Council President's Office, and the Office of Council Services. Our committee staff from Council Services today will be Paroma Nandi. Today, the committee is going to hear the following in this order: 25-0129, Supplementary State Fund Operating Appropriation, Department of Recreation and Parks. 26-0151, Taxes, Property Tax Increase of Homestead Tax Credit Percentage. And LO 25-0001, our quarterly budget briefings. And at this time, we're going to begin with 25-0129. And again, that's Supplementary State Fund Operating Appropriation, Department of Recreation and Parks, Service 654, Urban Forestry, for $415,146. This bill was introduced on November the 24th of 2025. And as we're resuming consideration of this bill, at our last meeting, this item was recessed because we did not have a Department of Recreation and Parks representative present to respond to potential committee questions. We do appreciate the department for being here today so the committee can complete its review on record. We are going to start with our agency reports at this time, and we're going to begin with our law department. And is the bill approved for form and legal sufficiency?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you, and I apologize. Can you state your name?
Yes.
And also
Michelle Toth on behalf of the Law Department.
Thank you. And the Department of Finance.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Laura Larson, City Budget Director. We stand behind our favorable bill response.
Thank you. And Department of Recreation and Parks. Okay, so at this time, do we have any questions from committee members for the Recreation and Parks regarding this particular bill? Okay. Madam Vice President.
Good morning. Just one. Camp Small, of course, resides in the 6th District. And, you know, we had a very terrible fire a while back, which could have been worse. And thanks to our fire department and all the assistance that they had helped to alleviate more harm. So are there, I know this bill is about jobs and so on, but as far as safety and as people start to work there, are there any added things in place that we should know about?
Good morning, Councilwoman. Jenny Morgan from Recreation and Parks. I have my colleague, Sean Preston, who runs the Camp Small facility, so I'm going to let him take this.
Hi, I'm Sean Preston. I manage Camp Small. I'm the recycling coordinator there on site, and I was there at the time of the fire as well. Yeah, we've put measures in place and are still working on additional measures, but our site has been cleared. All debris has left the facility. We've increased staff too through grant support. So, you know, not only have we removed the excess materials, you know, many of which got burned by the fire, but we've also added lanes through, additional fire lanes. So, you know, we've sort of checked off the boxes that the fire department has asked us to do. You know, our level of sorting has increased to where we are, you know, properly storing materials to code and regulations. So, yeah, we have done quite a bit to to sort of mitigate those things in the future.
And you're in close proximity to the vacant vinegar plant. Are you looking to do anything or try to buy that, or has there been conversation?
So not to my knowledge, that vinegar plant was for sale, and I believe it's currently being leased by Harrington and Sons as a facility, like a facility to store equipment and also to do heavy equipment training, which is coincidental since we also do that at our facility.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Madam
Thank you.
Chair.
Thank you, Vice President Middleton. This may be for finance or Rex and Parks. It was actually mentioned in both of the reports. It was stated that there would be, for Camp Small, that it would be an expected increase in revenue. Where do you guys foresee the revenue? What's the revenue stream?
I'll defer to Rec and Parks on that.
So our revenue, since we are still an innovation fund program, our revenue goes back to innovation fund payoff. We are currently in the black with our payoff to the innovation fund. We are looking at purchasing some additional equipment in the upcoming months, which will put us back into that repayment plan. But our revenue comes from the sale of all materials. So we do donations of materials to public projects. So we do offer a little bit more assistance to, to city agencies looking to do work or public projects by community members or city schools. And all materials are priced based off of current markets, as well as the cost of labor and the as-is cost of materials as they come into our facility. So projected numbers, we sell about $150,000 of revenue in lumber and material sales. We donate estimated about $100,000 worth of material, and we save the city for not having to pay for the material removal. We have a contract with a company, so we're under a 3-year contract right now for the material, all excess material that we don't currently sell, we have to have removed by a contractor, a vendor. And the cost of that is about $750,000 a year for 9,000 tons of material. We recycle through our program about 2,000 tons of material. So that's quite a significant savings to the city that they don't have to pay for that material removal, and instead, we create revenue off of that. We use that revenue to pay back our innovation fund, which gives us equipment to further our program.
Thank you. For my second question, is regarding the grant ending. The grant ends, it's running through 12/31 of 2027. So is there any type of plan right now on how we're going to sustain the 2 positions and the training costs beyond that date? Has that been?
So the positions that we're looking to do are both our community aid contract positions. We very much intend to keep 2 of those positions. One would be a recurring apprenticeship program that we're hoping to establish a long-term program with the Baltimore Tree Trust to support the apprentice program. But one of those we would turn into a permanent position. The other one would be a training program where, since those employees would be Baltimore City employees that we're bringing on for those trainings, we are able to give heavy equipment operation. Me and my colleague, Nick Oster, just went through with DPW heavy equipment training with their the trainers program. And so we'd be offering those things, and then they go and get their certification with the DPW, with Paul Taylor at DPW. So, that's a really significant thing for people on their tool belt skill set to come through our program, learn how to operate heavy equipment such as excavators, front-end loaders, skid steers. So we're hoping to keep one, give somebody else those tool sets that they need to go and get employment. and then also keep the administrative or office support position. And we have had talks, with our deputy director on putting.
On what the funding looks like
Putting in
after the
funding,
grant
yeah.
ends? Okay. So I can see the one position, we're looking to keep them within the city pipeline, within maybe possibly another agency. And you guys are still having ongoing talks about what it looks like for the other position, a contractual position, beyond the grant ending?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Councilman Schleifer?
Thank you. Did we ever get to the bottom of what the cause of the fire was?
No, we never got to the bottom of the cause of the fire. It was investigated by the fire department and determined to be, they weren't able to identify it. But given the location, we deal with a lot of wood chips. Wood chips are combustible. Those are the things that we monitor. You had asked, what sort of precautions we do. Before the fire, we are aware of the risk of fire, and that's through combustible materials, or wood chips specifically, and we monitor those and we regulate those. And we had, up until this point, been able to keep a significant fire from breaking out. This fire did not happen from our wood chips. It happened about 700 yards away from where we store our wood chips was the start of the fire. So, given that there were no combustible materials in that area and we were suffering from a drought, it is likely that, or it could have been like accidental arson, a cigarette or something like that. But, so we've put measures into place to try to secure our facility some more so that, people can't just wander into the facility. We've added another security gate.
So, is there like no smoking around?
We have also implemented no smoking.
But before the fire, you didn't have that?
We didn't have it enact, but we don't smoke.
What's that?
But we don't smoke. Me and my colleagues do not smoke cigarettes. So, it wasn't something that we were able to implement from people wandering in. But
So people were able to just get in,
yeah,
and you guys don't have security cameras to see who would wander in?
we do. We keep security cameras around our building.
Okay.
But we don't have electricity out by the gate, the front gate.
So this 700 yards from the wood chips where the fire started, there was no like camera footage that would show anybody coming or going from around there?
There wasn't, no. No, we gave our camera footage, to risk management for reviewing, once electric had been reestablished in the facility. But they weren't able, viewing the footage to determine the cause of the fire.
Gotcha. So has there been a camera put up there since then?
There has not there hasn't been any additional cameras. What we've done is we've positioned the materials that we're storing so that now our camera does go all the way to the gate. So before it was obscured, the vision was obscured by those old piles of material that were burned. Now we've positioned things so that the camera does go all the way to the gate. It would be
Gotcha.
hard to ID anything, but we would be able to see if somebody was entering the facility.
Wouldn't it be easier to just put a camera at the gate rather than move all the materials so that the existing camera can see the gate?
Yeah, we don't have electricity run out there, so we would need some sort of like mobile generator running a camera or something like that.
Yeah, the housing department uses battery-operated ones to catch illegal dumpers. Certainly, this seems like a no-brainer to have one of those or something similar, which you could probably buy on Amazon, to put at that front gate so that after hours, if somebody does stumble in, because we're here talking about this proposal, which is obviously a small grant proposal, but the cost of fighting that fire and the remediation after and that whole thing was quite costly, as I'm sure you know. So it just seemed to me that we would want to make sure that that doesn't happen again.
Yeah, we do, Forestry Department does have some of those small, like, trail cameras, so we can certainly put one of those up.
Thank you. It sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, it does seem like a good idea.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilman Gray?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you go into a little bit more about the training of the employees of the heavy machinery?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, their training for those two labor positions would be focused on not just heavy equipment, but also wood shop skills and basic forestry and sawmilling and those practices of lumber production. For the heavy equipment, the training, I don't have that outlined with me, but you know, we have it broken down to where it's a 6-month training course. So, you know, they would be getting several hundred hours on heavy equipment. They start on a skid steer, so that is, like, you know, the simplest low risk. We begin with training videos. You know, they sit down, they watch the training videos on the machines. Then we show them proper walk around, maintenance of the equipment, what things to look for. All of the safety things is what we hammer in first. And then it's just basic controls before they get into moving around of materials. We do that with all 3 of the pieces of equipment. It's a large skid steer that we run, a John Deere 325, and then we run an excavator that's a small to mid-size excavator with a 360 grapple, so they learn how to operate a really sophisticated attachment to that machine, as well as, you know, bucket and normal things. And then we do a front-end loader that's a large track loader, John Deere track loader. All of our equipment is through DGS and, you know, through fleet.
Yep, and this training is only going to be for the next 2 years, or is it for as long as they're funding? And also, how many employees? Is it only the 2 employees each year, or are there more members of forestry that will be trained?
There is an opportunity for more members of forestry as well as recreation and parks. DPW, you know, through us getting the training the program that we did and knowing Paul Taylor, he would also be interested in trying to set something up in addition, you know, to what we're doing in-house. But for us, you know, we really wanted to offer more training to folks. The hurdle was that, you know, we can only train on heavy equipment city employees. So we have an additional, like, workforce development program that's established with the Baltimore Tree Trust that's, you know, under an agreement, but it's funded by the Baltimore Tree Trust. And those folks come over and they're with us for 5 months, and they're just learning the forestry skills and some wood shop skills. And the heavy equipment operation is reserved for that 1-year-long apprenticeship program. We would love to offer that to more folks if we can figure out a way to do it.
Definitely. I just want to just make sure that we are actually doing everything we can to retain those apprentices and the folks that we're training. I think to me, it does the city a disservice financially to train folks up to just go to another jurisdiction with the tools that they've learned here in Baltimore City. And so I'm sure we'll be talking about this more and more, but I just really would love for Rec and Parks to figure out a way, you know, also with the mayor's office to, if we're giving folks this training, that we're also finding a pipeline for them to be within the city of Baltimore, so those skills that they've learned can stay here, so we can take the 8-month backlog that is the best in the country and turn it down to 2 months or, you know, 4 months if we're
Absolutely.
lucky. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. That's my hope as well.
Thank you.
Are there any additional questions from the committee? And seeing and hearing none, we are going to go to public testimony. We'll be checking at this time to see if anyone has signed up to testify for the bill.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we do not have any public testimony at this time. Is there a motion to move 25-0129, Supplementary State Fund Operating Appropriation, Department of Recreation and Parks, for $415,146 is favorable?
So, second.
Okay, so it has been moved favorably by Councilman Gray. We are going to do a roll call vote at this time. McCray is a yes. Councilman Schleifer? Yes. Vice President Middleton?
Yes.
Councilman Gray?
Yes.
Okay, so we have 4 yeses, 1 member, Glover, who is absent. And this motion passes. This bill is going to move to second reader at our next city council meeting on February the 23rd, 2026. We are going to take a brief 2-minute break, and then we will return with our next bill. Welcome back to the Budget and Appropriations Committee. Next up is going to be 26-0151, taxes, property tax, increase of homestead tax credit percentage. This bill was introduced on February the 9th, 2026. It was sponsored by Vice President Middleton at the request of the administration. What this bill would do is adjust Baltimore's homestead tax credit tax credit cap from 4% to 6%. I am also a co-sponsor of this legislation, and I support the policy direction because at its core, the bill is about tax fairness and provides predictability for our homeowners and makes sure Baltimore remains competitive while we work towards broader property tax relief. And at the same time, as budget chair, my responsibility is to make sure that we do get the details right the first time. Once something touches people's tax bills, we do need to be confident that the outcome matches the intent. And with that, we're going to get directly into our agency reports. We're going to be starting with our law department.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Desiree Lucky on behalf of the Law Department. We approve this bill for form and legal sufficiency.
Okay, and now we're going to move to Department of Finance, who also has a presentation. And for all of our committee members, we're going to hold our questions until we get through our agency reports.
Okay, good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you. My name is Bob Senemy, Deputy Finance Director, and I'll be presenting a few slides on this bill today. So what I first wanted to do, see if we can get the, there we go. So we have just a couple agenda topics for today. One is to kind of zoom out and talk more broadly about the mayor's tax reduction strategy. Then we're going to drill back in and talk about this bill in particular on the homestead tax credit. We'll explain the impact of the bill, what we've calculated, and then we'll of course take any questions. So first, big picture. Last week, the mayor rolled out a bit more detail about his tax reduction plan, and going back to December, we released Securing Baltimore's Future, which is our new 10-year financial plan. And there are 3 strategies in there for reducing the tax burden on our residents. The first one is what we call tax rate realignment. So, what we found in our research is that there are some practices that Baltimore has over the years that are actually out of line with what many counties or other municipalities in Maryland do. We'll show you how that applies to the bill today as well. And a lot of times, if you can make subtle changes to those things, you can actually get your tax rate down. And, we think this is, even though most of those actions are cost neutral to a homeowner, we still think that in many cases, it's the right thing to do. It makes us more attractive when trying to attract additional residents. The second thing is direct tax relief. So we want to deliver savings directly to our homeowners. And as you'll see today, the net impact of our proposal is a net cost to the city, which means we're putting dollars back into the hands of our homeowners. And then finally, number three, the third strategy is to protect our vulnerable residents. We've found over time that we have a pretty strong belief that we're under-enrolled in a lot of other tax credits out there, including some big ones that are actually paid for entirely by the state. So the better job that we can do getting folks signed up for those tax credits, the more savings to the homeowner at a minimal or sometimes no cost to the city itself. So there were four initiatives in the 10-year plan that were rolled out last week that we'll be talking about today. The first one, again, is to adjust the homestead tax credit cap from 4 to 6. Second would be to reduce the effective residential rate from 2.04 to 1.99 for residential homeowners. Those two are meant to go concurrently, which we'll show you in a moment. The third is to boost enrollment in our tax credits, and we're in the process of standing up a team to do that. And then fourth would be to expand the eligibility for some of those state tax credits. We've been partnering with some of our delegates and senators at the state level, especially Senator Hayes, and there's actually already been a bill introduced in Annapolis to do just this on number 4. Overall 10-year financial plan, our goal is to get the full rate down to about $2.13 from about $2.25, and then to get our residential rate all the way down to $1.76 over the course of the 10-year period. And this chart just shows kind of the history of our residential rate in orange and the full rate in blue, and our plan of where we would get by fiscal 35. And for the median homeowner, if we were to implement all of the phases of that program, median homeowner would save about $1,000 over that 10-year period from our proposal. So again, significant, really focus on the median homeowner, that average person, they would see some significant savings over the course of time. So I wanted to drill back in now on the homestead tax credit change, which is the first piece of our package. And so first, just as a definition, the homestead cap, it limits the annual increase in the taxable real property assessment for eligible homeowners. And that impacts the total value of the bill. To be eligible, you must sign up with SDAT, and you must certify that you are living in that residence for the year. You must certify that it is your single principal residence. And we have about 75,000 taxpayers that fall into that category. The state law says that the local jurisdictions must set the cap between 0 and 10%, anywhere between 0 and 10%, and ours has been set at 4% for many decades. Just very simple how the credit is calculated. In our tax system, we have both your actual assessment, and then we have a value of what your homestead assessment is. And just in simple terms, the law basically says the homeowner gets the benefit of calculated at the lower of the two. Right? So if your property is growing very rapidly, the homestead gives you some protection. If your home's not growing that rapidly in value, you get taxed on the lower amount. So it's favorable to the homeowner. They get the benefit of paying the taxes on the lower of the two in our system. And in this example, simple example, if your actual property was growing by 20% in a year, I should say that's like highly unusual for that to happen. That would be certainly an outlier, but just for simplicity, you would owe $2,698 on your taxes. With the homestead protection, you would only be paying on that $104,000 assessment increase, and it would be a savings of about $360 on an annual basis. So what we found in our benchmarking is that our homestead cap at 4% is actually very low compared to other jurisdictions. You can see if you look at other counties, we would be ranked 20th out of 24, tied for 20th out of 24 counties in the state of Maryland. You see there's a few all the way at the maximum of 10, a lot of a 7 and a lot of 5s. On the right-hand side, if we were a municipality, we're not a municipality for taxing purposes, but if we were, I think it's a relevant comparison because some of those other cities or municipalities are similar to Baltimore. We would also be near the bottom, 22 out of 24. What's most striking about that list is that half of those top municipalities set their cap all the way at the top of 10%. That means that if a property's home is growing by 10% a year, they let it grow all the way up to the maximum allowed of 10% and collect the taxes on that amount. We don't think that's the right move for Baltimore. Our proposal is just to inch our cap up a little bit to make sure we're more in line and more in the median for the state of Maryland. The impact of the homestead tax credit, what we found in our research is that it does tend, the benefit does tend to accrue to some of the wealthier neighborhoods. Part of that is because the homes are assessed at higher values. So you can see the top 10 neighborhoods in terms of what neighborhoods get as a benefit from the credit, their homeowners in those neighborhoods. You can see Canton and Riverside, Locust Point, Roland Park, Guilford, some of the wealthier neighborhoods in the city. Even if you take the value out of it, the neighborhoods that have the most residential properties signing up for the tax credit still skews in that direction. You see Cedar Croft, you see Homeland again, Guilford again, Evergreen, which is adjacent to Roland Park. So, our research on this that shows that most of the benefit, a lot of the benefit accrues to those wealthier neighborhoods. And our idea here is let's get the rate down across the board for everybody and ask those that are getting the homestead to contribute a little bit more. In terms of the impact of this proposal, again, it's very important that these two things go concurrently. So what we're proposing today is that we increase the cap from 4 to 6. That would, from the city's perspective, generate about 4.5 million more on an annual basis. However, what we would do if the council does pass this legislation as part of the fiscal 27 budget, we would reduce the effective residential rate by 5 cents down to $1.99, and that would cost us $8.3 million. So the net impact would be a loss of $3.8 million of city revenue. And again, I want to hold on this point for a second. This is a net cost to the city. That means we are willingly saying we will bring in less property tax revenue in order to put more benefit back in our homeowners' pockets. There's been a lot of focus over the last couple of years, rightly so, about inflation and costs and the burden that our homeowners face. We felt it was very important not to just make this neutral overall, but to actually deliver some savings back to our homeowners. I want to walk you through a couple really simple examples quickly of how this would look to a homeowner. So this is a situation where a residential homeowner is growing triennially at 8% and 6% back to back. And by the way, triennial, that means over 3 years. So 8% really equates to only a little bit over 2.5% per year. If you're facing 6% triennial growth, that's only about 2% per year. This homeowner is not benefiting from the homestead cap because the homestead only protects you if you're growing over 4 or in the future 6%. So this person is going to see a significant savings. The blue is the net property tax. The green is the value of our targeted homeowners tax credit. That's the one that reduces the effective rate from 204 to 199. And so you can see that homeowner gets additional benefit from our change. And just looking at the numbers, if you map this out over a 6-year period actually over 2 cycles, they would accrue about $727 of savings over that 6-year period. So, over $100 per year, which we think is pretty significant on a $215,000 home. The other scenario is where you have a homeowner experiencing higher growth in their property taxes, or in their assessments, I should say. And so in this case, you have 15% triennial growth and then 12. In this case, the homeowner is protected by the homestead tax credit. So you can see that little yellow sliver there is what they're currently getting from the homestead tax credit. In a future year, they would lose that protection, but the value of the increase of our rate reduction would actually be even more than what they lose from the homestead tax credit. So you see here, they lose $48 of homestead protection, but their THTC credit goes from $452 to $564. And so the combination of those two things also leads to savings. It's not as significant, and in many cases we'll see, I'll show you in a minute, some of these homeowners will be about neutral, but you can see even here on that home, there would be about $166 of savings over that 6-year period. Not as significant, but a little bit from somebody whose property is growing more in value. And so we ran the scenario this year of what is the impact to every single residential homeowner, all 75,000 of those people I mentioned earlier. And you can see under this proposal for fiscal 27, over 64,000 taxpayers would see a savings versus current law, an average of about $58 per homeowner. I mean, it can vary anywhere from a couple bucks of savings all the way into the hundreds of dollars of savings. There will be 10,807 households that will see no impact. So the rate reduction will be offset by the higher homestead, and they really probably won't notice the difference. And then we did have 437 taxpayers that would pay more. And this was a surprise to us when we ran our Group 2 assessments that just came through in December into January. There's kind of a strange quirk in the law that caused those 400 to pop out. Our commitment, the administration made a commitment that we would want to hold everybody harmless from this change. And so we could correct those 400 people. It would be a pretty simple fix. It would be an additional piece of legislation that we're trying to craft up now and draft now. It would only require about $9,000 in funding. So our feeling is just to get those people back to neutral, even though it's only about $20 per person, let's just fix those. To get just a little bit in the weeds for a moment, the reason those folks popped out largely is because our targeted homeowners tax credit, the one that delivers the rate relief to individuals, is calculated on the improvement value of your property assessment, not the total. So this is a weird quirk in how the law was set up. When you get your assessment, there's the value of the land, the value of the improvements, and then the total. For some reason, we're not sure why historically, the bill for that residential relief was calculated only on the improvement value. So to fix this, going forward, we want to just calculate the value on the total assessment, which going forward would correct it for these individuals and get them back to neutral. So we think that would be a pretty simple fix. We're working on legislation. It's not on the same rush timing that this one was. There's no state requirement to do this. So we'll be bringing that back to the members of the council shortly. And again, it should be a pretty simple technical fix to language. I want to close just by talking about those additional tax relief initiatives that I mentioned earlier and why they're so important. So we had said, one, we want to boost enrollment in state homeowners and renters tax credits. Those are paid for largely by the state. Our staff has done a ton of great research that has showed that if you use census tract data and tax credit data, we think we know pretty specifically where there are people that are under-enrolled in these programs. And so we would like to invest some funds to stand up a team and work with folks in the community to get more folks enrolled in these tax credits. I want to emphasize that, the role of the council could be very helpful in this. Council members often, the most trusted person in a neighborhood, and having the council support of, if we can target for you where we think there are folks that could be signed up, we would love to work with the council on that for sure to help get people signed up. And then I mentioned earlier the expanded eligibility. There's a bill already in Annapolis, this was just released last week, to expand the eligibility for that credit from a household income of $60,000 all the way up to $100,000. So the combination of these two things, we hope gets more people enrolled. Last year, we had about 6,000 people enrolled. A decade ago, we had 10,000 people enrolled in these programs. And the net benefit, the average benefit of that homeowner's tax credit is about $1,700 per individual homeowner, which is very significant, could be, life-changing for somebody if they can get signed up for that credit. So that's the first kind of 4 phases, I would call it, of our proposal to lower the rate and lower the burden on our homeowners. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions from the committee.
Before we get any questions to our agencies, we do have one more agency report. It's going to be from the Department of Housing and Community Development. Does that office stand by their report? Do you have anything to add?
Good morning, Alice Kennedy, Housing Commissioner. DHCD stands by our bill report.
Okay, we're going to get into the questions at this time. I'm going to start with one question before I open it up to other committee members. The hold harmless legislation, can you speak to why that legislation was not provided at the same time as a companion piece to this bill or within it when this was presented?
Sure. Yeah, I can answer that, and I'll take responsibility for this. We were the reason it wasn't is because we were running the Group 2 assessment data as we were introducing this legislation. We had run kind of like test scenarios before that showed that everybody would pop out as either held harmless or with some net savings. So we were surprised, our staff and I were surprised that some folks popped out that had a higher cost, and it was only after some digging into the details that we learned what the cause of that was. And largely it's that kind of strange issue where some folks have a much higher value of their land as opposed to the improvements, which is usually, it's very unusual. So it took us a little time to kind of dig into it and figure out, why did these 400 pop out? You know, we first kind of talked to ourselves, do we even need to do anything? Because it's only a couple bucks per homeowner. You know, after talking to the administration, they felt like the right thing to do would be to come back and say, hey, we can propose something that would fix that. So that was all after we had introduced this legislation that you're hearing today. And our commitment is we'll go back and you know, make sure we get something, you know, in the queue very quickly. Again, it's not on the same rush timing, and we think it's a pretty simple language fix. It's more of a technical correction to how we calculate the THTC. But I'll take responsibility for that, because I thought, and when I'd brief folks, that everybody would fall either into that net neutral or, you know, savings category, and then we had these few pop out that took us about 2 or 3 weeks to kind of dive into and figure out what was going on with those individual taxpayers.
Okay, we're going to go to Vice President Middleton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I first of all want to thank the mayor and his administration for working with me and briefing me, and I think one of the reasons I accepted to approve this task is our present mayor, Brandon Scott, is my 5th mayor. And a number of mayors have, you know, put certain strategies and plans in their plans, but never really took the time to start listening to our residents and trying to figure out ways to really hone in on work on tax relief. And I think this strategy is basically a good strategy to be on track to really start working on this. And I know that there's a timeline that we have to try to work with. That's why we're kind of moving this. This is for the committee. That's why we're kind of moving this, because I think it does have to go to the Board of Estimates, and there's a process, and it really would be nice to get this moving as soon as we can. And I think, Bob, you did mention that this is going to affect, I guess, the medium homeowner and help right away, which, you know, everyone would like to be affected right away, but, you know, it's just not feasible. And I guess one of my questions is, I know you had mentioned you'd like the council to help with outreach. If you have some ways we can do that, but I think it would be good to, if we had some kind of list that on just targeting particular areas and people that have not taken advantage for some reason of the tax credit. That's one way we could help, if you could narrow down by district. Is that part of your plan?
Yeah, that's exactly the idea. So, you know, I mentioned our team had done some, you know, has the data on who signed up for not only the homestead, but those other state homeowners tax credits where the benefit is pretty significant. So we have, we used census data. Since the state homeowners tax credit is based on income, household income, we don't have household income by address, but we have enough census data to suggest that, you know, if this particular census tract has average, you know, household income of X, you know, then there's a pretty good indicator that maybe some of those people in those neighborhoods would qualify for this tax credit. So our idea would be to really kind of zero in on which areas we think are, you know, that folks could be eligible. You know, we'll be involved in the work, but will be turning it over to the Mayor's Office of Community Affairs because they're better at kind of knowing where and how to work with the neighborhoods. But as I mentioned, you know, council member is often the most trusted person, your recognizable face. It would be very helpful to have your support and even, you know, have that list of folks so that you know, like, hey, we got to try to get this person signed up or see if they're eligible. We find that a lot of the sign up happens around tax season because some people go and get their taxes prepared at one of those preparation services. They have all their documents. The state homeowners tax credit is complicated because you have to show not only your household income, but your net worth, which is kind of complicated. You have to look at like any other assets you have or pensions or things like that. So it's hard to sign up for it, but we do think it is feasible to get more folks signed up if we can really zero in on these are the blocks or these are the members or these are the residents that are likely to be. You know, trying to knock on everybody's door or something like that would just be beyond our capability, but we think we can target it to a level that there's a high probability that somebody that you're reaching out to is probably eligible. So that's the idea. And again, we'll be kind of doing the data side of it, but we'll be working with the Mayor's Office of Community Affairs to kind of help coordinate how we'll do that. So we'll be in touch with folks shortly about our plans there.
And then my second question, I know at the press conference, there was talk about having a payment plan for taxes. I'm sure you're going to be involved in that as well. Anything you'd like to add about that piece?
I'm not as close to that one, to be honest. That one,
Okay.
Joanna and Michael and the finance department are working on that one. But yeah, there is legislation that is coming soon about trying to offer payment plans, especially for folks that get behind on their taxes. So do you
Thanks, Bob. Yes, we're actually partnering with Councilwoman Middleton. Oh, sorry, Madam Chair. Tyler Chanel, Mayor's office. We're actually partnering with Councilwoman Ramos on the payment plan legislation, and we just received a draft of that bill on Friday. We're currently reviewing it, and then we will look forward to introducing it for discussion in this council.
Okay, thank you. I'll stop there, Chair McCray.
Just as a follow-up, so right now we don't have an outreach plan that has been developed.
Director Kennedy wants to kind of comment on
Sure.
what's going on there.
Good morning, Chair, members of the committee. So we do have within the Department of Housing and Community Development a comprehensive strategy that also is under Deputy Commissioner Hart. We also here today is also Donald Wright, who kind of runs as our director of services for outreach, specifically around tax sale prevention for homeowners, as well as outreach to residents to increase the number of residents that are participating in the homestead tax credit, the homeowner's tax credit, as well as the renter's tax credit. So DHCD currently does that outreach work. I think we can, take what we currently do in terms of how we disseminate that information, where we're connecting with residents, continue to work with the administration as well as the Mayor's Office of Community Affairs and the council to broaden that outreach. This is a key part as well as a strategy for Mayor Scott's Reframe Baltimore because access to the homeowner's tax credit, renter's tax credit is also a key part of the prevention of vacant properties as well. So we do have outreach and education that's in place and we can continue to work to strengthen that with finance and the administration as well as members of the council.
So there is already an outreach strategy. Is there a new outreach plan specifically for this legislation that's going to include new staffing, that's going to include a timeline for how we're going to get folks enrolled between, say, now and July of 2026 that's already been developed?
No, I would say we have our current existing outreach plan that exists, and we do not have any additional staffing that would be assigned to it. We do have the tax group within DHCD in terms of tax sale prevention group no additional staff, but we'll be evaluating what additional work would need to be done between now and July 1st. The biggest piece too is different parts of the homeowner's tax credit falls in with a later time frame as well, because that is due in October.
Do you feel that currently the current plan that you have for the programs and the support that our communities need for referral to know that these credits exist, do you feel that what we have currently, even without this, is working?
I think I would say that it's a yes, and I think that it is working to the point where the people that we can get to and work with, but we need to have, and we've talked about this with the administration as well as others, that we need a broader reach and a broader engagement with more people than what we're finding just at community meetings, through broader mailings, other ways to try to engage. Because even when or if we send letters or other things, there's still confusion potentially among some of the residents. So I think that we've seen a greater success in the outreach that we've done over the last 3 years, and kind of rethinking and organizing the staff that are involved in that, and bringing on Mr. Wright to kind of help lead that with his reaches into the community as well. And there's more to do.
How many owner occupants are likely eligible but not receiving the homestead tax credit right now?
Yeah, I would say on the state homeowners tax credit, I mean, we think it's thousands. We've looked at the data I mentioned in my testimony. We were, last full year we have data. The state puts out a report about how many people have signed up from each jurisdiction. We were around 6,000 a few years ago. And even a decade before that, we had 10,000. So we've lost enrollees over time, and that largely, we think some of that is because of the eligibility criteria that I mentioned, that they've been fixed at a household income of $60,000 for decades. And some of these people just might have indexed out just with inflation. Their incomes could have grown a little bit where they're not eligible anymore. So that could be part of the problem. On the homestead tax credit itself, we manage more of that side of the process. And what we found over time is, if you remember back decades ago, there were a lot of people that were getting the tax credit that were actually ineligible, meaning that it has to only be on one property. So we had people getting a homestead on 2 different properties, and they couldn't be living at both places, obviously, at the same time. So there was a lot of cleanup work done at the state level and working with local jurisdictions to kind of actually get people out of the homestead tax credit that weren't eligible for it. Now we feel like we've gotten to a level that the people that are getting it are eligible, and we have to make sure that we get folks signed up that are eligible for it, because there's probably a missing component there too, where somebody might be eligible for it and hasn't signed up. So that's part of these initiatives, is not only get people signed up for the state homeowners tax credit, but if they're eligible for the homestead, to get them in the queue too. The homestead is a lot easier to sign up for, because by law, if you transfer a property, you have to get a form. Like, your realtor has to give you the form when you close on the house, and give you very specific instructions about how to sign up. It's a one-time sign up, and once you sign up and certify, you get it for as long as you own the home. State homeowners tax credit is different. You have to sign up every year, so it's harder to get signed up for. So we feel like we probably have better compliance or signups on the homestead, is my instinct, as opposed to the state homeowners tax credit, which is a lot more complicated, a lot more paperwork to get people signed up.
And if I may, I would agree with Deputy Senemy on that as well, that we have seen over the years that the hardest tax credit to actually obtain from just paperwork as well as the time intensity is the homeowner's tax credit, because of that yearly requirement and the amount of paperwork that the state requires that you have to submit for. One of the other key pieces that I just wanted to state is that DHCD is also including documents with our programs, all of our programs, in terms of whether or not you're coming in for rehab, home rehab, or weatherization as well, for assistance on application for any of the tax credits also with permission from the homeowner. We're assisting them with online applications, and we're also partnering with the Mayor's Office of Older Adults on that outreach. And the tax sale, Mr. Wright is also working with our team internally, and then we'll be working with MOGR for meetings within all of the council districts as well for outreach.
We're going to go to Vice President Middleton for a quick follow-up, and then we'll be going directly to Councilman Schleifer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You did answer part of my question, partnering with the Older Adults Office. Could we add to that, because I know that office it's a fairly new office, and when they come before us, they're going to probably be showing data of certain things that they've worked with. And I think that we should keep that data of the outreach, whether it's at senior centers or just how we're going to get to older adults by using in-house departments, but also outreach with certain outside teams that work with older adults. Something that just pops in my mind, places like the PACE Center over in Mondawmin. That's an organization where people come in there, it's a free place, and just having that detailed outreach for older adult homeowners. And just think of some other churches, our faith base can also help with this. I just think the outreach needs to really go far and deep, and we need to keep, we probably, as a council, would like to see a list of how that outreach has happened. Thank you.
Councilman Schleifer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bob, your presentation spoke a lot about a lot of different wonderful proposals that will help a variety of people if a lot of different things happen. This bill that we're being asked to vote on today is whether or not we want to increase the cap of the homestead tax credit 50% from 4% to 6%, removing protections that long-term homeowners in the city were guaranteed when they saw new development happening around them, such as around Hopkins and other high-growth areas in the city. So I see your whole proposal trying to talk about a whole variety of things, but if we vote today to increase that cap and instantly cost, $4.5 million in impact on some people, which we don't know who yet, this next year, and obviously long-term, it'll be a much larger impact. Does it guarantee that any of the other things you spoke about are guaranteed to happen?
So the reason we paired this change with the rate reduction is to make sure that we hold folks at least harmless, or plus some, that we're actually putting, savings back into their pockets. So we would not propose this change on its own without the commitment to do that rate reduction.
But that's not my question. My question is, if we vote today to increase this cap, does that guarantee that all the other things that you spoke about will happen?
It definitely will guarantee that we'll do the rate reduction. That would come as part of the fiscal 27 budget. When you say other things that will happen.
Well, you spoke about all this other assistance for low income. And look, this bill does nothing for renters. Majority of the city is renters. This has no impact. It doesn't provide any relief to them. So when we're talking about raising this only on owner occupied, and according to your data, there's 2/3 of all property owners are benefiting right now from the homestead tax credit across the city. That means 2 out of 3 homeowners there's some type of impact to them. Some more than others. Some will have a positive. Many will have a negative. All these other things you spoke about, those items, will they be guaranteed to happen if this bill passes?
Yeah, again, What specifically, you're
I
talking
mean,
about the other initiatives?
in your presentation, you
Yep.
spoke about how there's state legislation to raise the income requirement,
Right.
eligibility. You spoke about, all these other auxiliary, other things that may happen that the administration might do.
So I would say yes on the outreach, yes on the reducing the rate, we have that under our control. Yes on introducing the legislation, partnering with the state to get it introduced. It's not guaranteed that it will pass to expand the criteria, but we already have legislation out there that has been introduced, like we said, by Senator Hayes. And, we think that there's a better chance. I mean, there's been a big focus on affordability, obviously, not just at the local level, but at the state level. So we're hopeful that will make some progress this year, that we'll get at least some increase to the eligibility. But that last one, that number 4, since it's state legislation, we can't guarantee that, but we'll be doing everything we can to try to make that a reality.
But, like along the terms of what the chair was just saying, all of these items, this bill's being fast-tracked. This was introduced last week. We have a hearing, 9 a.m. this morning, and this is being fast-tracked, something that has a huge impact on probably the hottest topic in the city, which is property taxes, is being done very quickly. And so, a lot of those other items and the outreach and those plans, that seems to be moving really slowly, but the increase in taxes seems to be moving very quickly. So being that this bill does not guarantee any of the things that you're talking about, it doesn't. It's not written in this bill. This bill is actually one of the shortest bills that I've ever seen. It literally is just saying we're raising the cap. Instead of 4%, we're raising it to 6%. And so could all of those things happen if we didn't pass this bill? Is it possible for all of those things to still happen if we voted today to reject this increase?
No, we wouldn't be able to move forward on the rate reduction. So we wanted to do it in a fiscal, we wanted to make sure that it was a net cost to the city so that we are putting dollars back into people's pockets, but we need to do it in a fiscally responsible way. If you give away too much revenue, you run into problems on all the other things we want to fund as part of the budget. That's why we made it a net impact of around a little less than $4 million.
So hold on a second, Bob. You're telling me that if this doesn't pass, it is impossible for you to do all of the other things you discussed?
I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it would definitely jeopardize the rate reduction.
I mean, based on your plan, but you could still physically do all of those items without this bill.
We could still physically do them, but on the rate reduction, it jeopardizes that because of the financial impact.
So if it actually could jeopardize that plan that you have, what about federal funding? If tomorrow federal funding was cut significantly, and we've seen craziness happening out of Washington, so that's certainly not a far-fetched idea. So if that were to be cut, we pass this today, next week we find out that Washington is cutting $50 million of federal funding out of our budget, you're still proceeding with the reduction?
So yes, we're pretty deep into the fiscal 27 budget planning process, and we feel confident that the net impact that we described today, that we can afford that for fiscal 27 and going forward. There's a whole host of risks out there, as we all know, but we feel, again, by having a small net impact, that we can manage that in fiscal 27 and manage that going forward. So
you could manage that with a $50 million cut from the federal government, but you can't manage to just, find another, few $1 million worth of savings to continue to do this anyways.
Again, I think where we are with the fiscal 27 planning process, we feel comfortable with what we're proposing today, is what I can tell you. We're far enough along in that planning process.
Yeah, I mean, Bob, I'm just asking you to just be real with us about, the reality. And the reality is that this bill does not guarantee anything other than that homeowners, the people who built this city, the people who've lived here for many years, who moved here knowing that there's a protection for them with this homestead tax credit. When that developer said, hey, we're gonna build this, all these townhomes next door to you, but don't worry, you have a homestead tax credit, which is gonna protect you from significant increase. We're removing that, but you're saying that we can't.
We're not removing it.
I mean, we're decreasing their protection by 50%. So, you know, I see your slides chose some pretty like convenient like calculations, but the reality is the risk and reward is just not there on this proposal. So for every $100,000 of assessed value, we're saying that a homeowner will receive a $50 in savings, right? But for every $100,000 of assessed value increase, the liability on that homeowner is $2,000 worth of increased property taxes. So that's a 40 times difference. So the risk versus reward on individuals is not equal. And so I had requested this data from you. Do you have the data that I requested?
So actually, we did look at this based on our conversation last week. And let me just preface all this by saying our experience with the homestead tax credit, I mean, we looked back 20 years, as far back as we could go. And what the experience of the last 2 decades shows us is that there are like these very isolated periods of very high property assessment growth where there's more people that end up getting the protection of the homestead. But on average over time, our triennial growth has been 5s and 6s and 7s, which again, that's on a triennial basis. And when you look on an annual, you're talking about 1.5% to 2.5% growth, which is way under the homestead cap. So there is a scenario where somebody would be worse off, and that's if they experience 2 back-to-back, you know, double-digit or higher assessment growth. Like if you had an 18% and then a 24%, or a 16 and a 20.
Which we just had those significant.
We did not have.
What was last year's?
We did not have back-to-back for an individual assessment group. We had group 1 and then group 2 and then group 3 go through a period of higher growth. We've never had a back-to-back group 1 with a 24, and then group 1 3 years later on this, the next cycle, a 20 or a 22. And again, I can show you that information in the slides if you want to pull them back up.
Yeah.
We look back for the, hold on, can I just finish what I'm saying here? So we tested this very carefully because we are concerned about the same situation that you're describing. But what we found is that historically, we have not seen that rapid back-to-back, and by back-to-back, I mean 2 triennial assessments in a row. What I would tell you also is that if we did have significant real property growth in a group back-to-back, if we had a 24 and then a 20 and then a 26 or an 18, I would be doing cartwheels. That would be a wonderful problem for us to have because it would mean that we're generating a lot more assessment growth. And if that situation came, we still have the flexibility to lower the rate even further. So I understand where you're coming from. You're asking, you know, it's like in the future, what would the impact be? But if we do experience more significant growth than we've seen historically, and again, we haven't seen that in the past 20 years, you know, the 10-year plan commits to further rate reduction to offset any of those additional costs. So we feel like we can manage it with that tool we have, which is that residential rate. And that's the thing that people most look at when they're choosing where to live.
All right, so Bob, my request at our last meeting was to provide the data, not showing me next year, which next year, I understand you're issuing this one-off credit to offset that so that next year there isn't that impact. And there happens to be an attorney general opinion on that, which we'll get to later on, whether or not you could be issuing those kind of special credits, especially the ones that we've seen long-term. But my request for data was to see that list going forward, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, by individual addresses to see what that impact is. Because just on your conservative figures here, it's showing that some people are paying $4.5 million. I know because I spent a lot of time this weekend just looking up random addresses around Hopkins and other areas that saw significant investment in the past 10 years or so. And what I found was that this is having a significant impact. This will have a significant impact in future years on people who've been in their properties for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, which are typically older residents, whereas the benefit is going to be realized by, you know, younger people like me who are just purchasing a house at today's market value, and it is what it is. And so we're seeing that $50 savings on the back of those long-term homeowners who are going to see significant increases. So that was the data I requested so that we can see the facts moving forward. And so do you have that data today?
So we pulled I mean, the only thing we have is the assessments through this fiscal year coming up, fiscal 27. So again, when you're looking at future years, what I'm telling you is we've modeled out, and we were happy to share that data with you of what everybody's assessment looks like, because we have all that. That's how we did our estimates. We don't have fiscal 28, we don't have fiscal 29, we don't have fiscal 30. Just let me. So what we noticed was in fiscal 24, 25, and 26, okay, there was 3 straight years of significant residential growth, okay? But what we saw this year for group 2, the group that's getting reassessed for 27, the triennial growth was only about 10%. So you had these 18, and I can get you the numbers. We had these 17s, 18s, 20s, 3 in a row for one group individually, but then group 2, which is now being reassessed, so there was that period of very high growth. Now they're coming back to earth. And I would expect we would see the same thing for group 3 next year and for group 1 2 years from now. So what I'm telling you is that the danger zone is when you have multiple years of back-to-back very high growth. We haven't seen that historically, and even with the data we're seeing for group 2 for fiscal 27, we're seeing them come way down to earth. Historically, we had a huge run up in housing prices going back all the way back in 2007, 2008, 2009, remember that period, and then the crash. So during those run-up years, we had a lot of people that benefited from the homestead, and then over the next decade, the number of people that were protected by the homestead came way down by a factor of 2/3 or so. And so, again, historically, what we see is not the majority of our homeowners don't benefit from the homestead on an annual basis. It's actually much closer to about 1/3 on average, and we think we're coming into a period now where the growth comes back down to earth. And again, like I said, if we had very significant growth, I would be thrilled. I mean, every year when we get that data from SDAT, we're all crossing our fingers. We're like, we hope it's a 18 or a 20 or a 24. But if we did, we can look at the impact of how it will affect homeowners, and we can further reduce the rate, because if you're seeing a 20, 22, 24 or higher, you're generating a ton of additional property tax revenue. And then we have that tool, which is we can reduce the rate even further, which is really the goal of this whole strategy.
Yeah, that's a great hypothetical, that we would reduce the rate. In my 10 years on the council, I've seen revenues increase on transfer tax and income tax and a whole variety of other taxes. All I've seen was increased spending. I have yet to see reduced taxes on any of those things. And so I'm just going to leave this round of questions on the fact that I understand big picture, you're talking about the groups 1, 2, and 3. And while I agree and I saw your formula on that impact, the pool of people we're talking about right now is there's 50,000 residents today in Baltimore City, owner occupied, who are currently benefiting from this state protection, this tax protection. And there are a lot of outliers, thousands of outliers across the city, which I think it's important for us before considering this increase to understand the impact we're going to have on especially some of our legacy and long-term residents, those outliers, because I can tell you what will happen based on what I saw in the numbers. I guarantee you in a few years from now, people are going to see significant increases, not a lot, but it'll be thousands of residents, and they're going to call our offices saying, why did you do this to us? And it's important for us to have that data. So I still need that data before I can support or even discuss this bill.
Can I just mention one thing on the outliers? What we've also found in the data, there's a lot of the outliers where you see that big, significant property value increase. They come with some kind of tax credit, like somebody rehabbed a property and got the CHAP tax credit. So yeah, the assessment goes from 50,000 to 400,000, as an example. And when you look at the growth rate, it's like exponential. It's like 3,000% or something. But those come with a forgiveness of all that improved value for a 10-year period. So there are outliers that I understand you're talking about, but when we run the data and look at it, most of those big increases came with a tax credit, which means they already have the protection from something else outside of what we're talking about here for often 10 years. For that tax credit. So you don't often see a property go from 50 to 400 or something like that without some significant improvements or work that was put into the property. And again, a lot of times those qualify for either a newly constructed tax credit or a CHAP tax credit, which makes the tax increase that you're talking about irrelevant, because they're getting a tax protection from that tax credit for at least a 10-year period of time. But again, I'm happy to share that data with you so you can see, for yourself what we're looking at.
Thank you both. We're going to get to Vice President Middleton, followed by Council Member Gray.
I was listening to that dialogue. Do you have staff specifically assigned for this strategy?
I'm sorry, can you be more specific?
Do you have staff that, when I say specifically assigned to this strategy, and that's for all different pieces, the outreach, the mathematical piece, do you have people specifically assigned, and do you need more staff?
We will. So for each of those initiatives, I mentioned earlier, we're standing up a team to set some statistics and targets on what we're hoping to see. So again, for the outreach, I think, when we kind of put our heads together with Office of Community Affairs, HCD, and our folks have been looking, like, we're going to set some targets of like, hey, we think we can get, X number of people signed up. We haven't done that yet. We have to stand up the teams and put the kind of knowledge together, but we will be tracking each of these on an annual basis. And I would say, for our 10-year plan overall, we have a website that you'll be able to click on every quarter and see what an update on what has changed over time, just to be able to communicate to folks our progress against all these goals.
Thank you. And I just want to reiterate to, I guess, the committee that this is a very difficult task, because I know that this office has to figure out ways also to keep our, this is the general fund. So it's, we gotta, here we're talking about apprenticeships and added things to help our communities. And it comes from the general fund. We want to keep DPW going after this storm. I mean, we have been getting hammered with things that really need to be done in sanitation and on our streets. And, I could go down the list. And then we also are working on this piece. So, my hat off to your office again for, this is a strategy. And of course, there's no complete guarantees, but it is a chance to have, all hands on deck to try to work this through. And I understand that there is, a timeline to get this started. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And again, I'll say our 10-year plan website will be updated periodically to show progress or changes on these homeowners. We look at that data very closely every year when it comes out, and as part of our budget deliberations, we talk about, could we do another penny, another 2 pennies, another 3 pennies of the tax rate? That's a decision we have. We usually try to work through up to and including the mayor, somewhere in that kind of December, January, February timeline. So we're very, we're deep into this data. We've looked at all the homeowners, organized it in a bunch of different ways, and we think we can manage it appropriately going forward.
Councilman Gray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question kind of revolves around protections. And so if we all have an imagination, I just want to think at 1 o'clock, I think the mayor is going to announce the AFRAM lineup, the headliners. And let's say it's an amazing set of headliners. A lot of people want to come to Baltimore. They see the Renaissance. They want to move into a neighborhood. They look at the Emerson Avenue corridor, which I represent. They see the proximity to Amtrak, and the MARC train station, to 70, to 695, to 95, to the airport. New amenities come in the shopping center. This is all facts, people, so please move into that corridor. But with that, lots of people start coming in. And you do the triennial, and you do the reassessment again for those groups. What protections exist if property values continue to increase faster than projected? I know we talked about the discussion of like what is and what isn't, but I'm more focused on what protections exist for those folks who properties actually are worth $125,000 right now, and then they jump up to $300,000, $350,000 because people are moving in, because we have vacancies, and those rentals become home owner occupied. What protections do we have for not only not the folks that move in, because we know they're going to benefit, but like for the folks that have been there for the 50 years and for the 40 years?
Right, thank you. So the first thing is the homestead itself is still there. So we're not removing the cap. It's still there. It's just a little bit higher. So that's an important protection that will still be there. And again, when you look at other Maryland counties, this would put us basically roughly in the middle of what others are doing. The second thing I can tell you is the tax rate. Like I mentioned earlier, is we can reduce that tax rate further if we see a lot of growth, and that's something we look at very closely, as I mentioned, each year, and something that the mayor's been very focused on, that as a budget decision each year, we can say, hey, we're seeing a lot of growth, let's cut the rate even further to offset any harms that people would see from that higher assessment growth. The other tax credits we talked about too are protection. So for the legacy homeowner, not all, but a lot of those people might be, we think, are a target audience for the state homeowners tax credit, because they might be on a fixed income, they might be retired or on Social Security or just a small pension or something like that. So, getting more people signed up for that, that's also a protection as well. So, we're not eliminating the homestead. It'll still be there and provide the protection over time. And again, historically, what we've seen is you do have these short run-ups in prices, but historically, we've seen it come back down pretty quickly, where you have fewer and fewer people that even get the protection of the homestead. So again, we think we can manage that over the long haul. And again, if the scenario going forward was better than what we saw in the last 2 decades, we would be thrilled, and we would certainly be aiming to reduce the rate even further to build that protection. And the examples we showed, the rate reduction is significant enough that it offsets the impact of the homestead, and that's why we're structuring it this way. And you'll get the benefit of that reduction every year going forward. So the rate is permanently lower, so people will see those savings over and over again each year.
Yep, thank you for the explanation, but in your answer, you kind of led me to the important point, and I think we've all kind of talked about it. It's the outreach component, because we know that you're saying that the increase you've seen happens every once in a while, and it's these historic highs, but historically, we've never seen this much investment in schools. We've never seen crime drop this much. Like, these are all things that, like, historically would make someone want to move into a city. And so, once again, for the people that have been here, we have to get this communication right. Just off the top of my head, commanders meetings. I know we have BPD here. That is a great way to attend each commanders meeting. The community presidents are there, community leaders are there. Pass it out to them, share this information. You really have to go into these mass areas where folks are meeting up to get to them. I know it's hard to really focus and specialize on certain people, but we're gonna have to. There are so many unforeseen or groups of folks that are harder to reach. We have to do it. We can't let those same folks, the ones that need the help the most, that need, for a better word, like the hand holding, let's help you through this, let's figure this out. Those are the folks that, if this increase happens, these folks are gonna be in trouble, because they don't have the resources or the know-how sometimes to find exactly what your net worth is. DACD is here, but, focusing on this getting passed is great, but that plan, if you have it and you say you have it, it needed to be pushed out last week. And so we really need to have a big focus on that. That's going to be really important, and not wait until September because the deadline is in October, because then that just puts the onus on everybody to try to rush. We can start now.
Yeah, totally agree.
They're taking the application now. Why are we waiting until later this, in 2 or 3 months to figure out something that we could be telling folks right now? And it'd probably be easier to work folks in, to work to help them through the sign-up process.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, our commitment will be standing this up as quickly as possible, putting the right folks together, and like we said earlier, tracking to see if we're making progress. I mean, if we're making progress, we should see more people. I mean, we're not going to double the amount in a year, right? We have to be realistic, but we should be tracking to see how well it's working. And if it's not working, our commitment would be, let's go back to the drawing board and figure out why we're not hitting people, because I want to see those numbers increase. I mean, we're convinced from the data that there's more that are eligible out there. So you have our commitment that we're working on that. We had a kickoff meeting with administration about which 10-year plan initiatives we want to prioritize, and this was honestly number 1 on the list, and everybody nodded and said, yeah, we've got to get this going first.
Thank you. Also, we're here as a council, seriously, let's get this going.
Yep.
For why are we not lowering the rate for all properties? Why is it just homeowner occupied properties?
Yeah.
And when is the overall rate coming down? Because I feel like that would probably do just as much of a boost. It would help us as a city just as much as just raising it just for those those properties that are homeowner occupied.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is it's more expensive to do that overall rate release because you're touching many more homeowners and it's less meaningful to each individual property. So we've chosen to target residential homeowners because those are the ones that, you know, they live here, they pay the taxes, they send their kids to the city schools. If you're expanding it to those other property owners, you get some people that are landlords or don't live in the city. And so it's really more of a targeted approach to kind of really focus in on that 75,000. We do want to get the overall rate down over time, and there's still discussion of that in the 10-year plan of how we do that. It's much more expensive. So just as an example, the penny of relief we're talking about, you know, we're reducing the rate by 5 cents. It's about a little less than $2 million for each penny. If you were doing that for the full tax rate, it would cost a little bit over $5 million. So it's just much more expensive, and then you're diluting the impact, including to some people that are landlords, absentee landlords, don't live in the city. And then so when you focus really on the homeowners, you can drive a little bit more value to those people directly. A bigger bang for the buck is the short answer.
Okay, just would love to see it come down overall because it's just not fair for someone 50 years to be able, you know, their taxes being raised, and for some slumlord or someone who lives in New York or in California can just sit there and still benefit from a rate that is advantageous to them, and they obviously don't care.
Yeah, and that's why, again, we're targeting to get this tax credit, you have to be residential, owner occupied, have certified to SDAT, I live in this home. And yeah, you know, we don't want to extend that benefit to some of the folks that you described. We want to be more targeted on this particular audience.
And how are we confirming and verifying that these homes are owner occupied? And I only say that is because I hand delivered mail to these homes that were homeowner occupied and were not, to put it there. So just to ensure, because we got return to sender from when we sent out from my office tax sale letters, and we actually had to deliver these ones that returned to sender, and we found out that 99% of those were not, in fact, homeowner occupied. And so on one end, I understand that like there are some homes that are no longer homeowner occupied, but how are we confirming that the person who says this is, it actually is?
I'm glad you asked that, because our strategy here is if you're ineligible, we're going to be aggressive about figuring that out and getting you off of that list. And then if you are eligible, we're going to be doing the outreach to get you signed up. So for the ineligible, our folks in finance in what we call the fiscal integrity office, they run a lot of checks annually to see, like, let me give you a simple example. If you're saying you're in an owner-occupied property, we can cross-reference that with like renter registration files that HCD keeps, and we can say, wait a second, you're saying you're owner-occupied, but you're also listing your property to be rented. Those things are inconsistent, and we get you off. So each year we run a lot of checks. We also look at like water usage, and if a property has no water usage for the whole year, it's kind of like, wait a second, does somebody actually live there? It's possible, but so we take those, use all those tools, and we send a list of those to SDAT every year, and we say, this is a list of people that we've identified through the data that we think are not eligible for the homestead. And SDAT will typically send a letter to them and say, look, if we don't hear back from you with some, additional certification, we're gonna drop you off the list. So we're very aggressive in both ways. If you're ineligible, we want you off because that's a cost to the city. But if you're eligible and we haven't touched you, this will be part of our outreach, and we want to get you signed up, even though that is a cost to the city. So we're kind of hitting it from both angles, and that process we've kind of fine-tuned, I think, over the years and gotten it down to kind of a science where we can see from the data ones that pop out that clearly are not owner-occupied and get them off the rolls. And that's an initiative in the 10-year plan that we didn't notice, and we'll be tracking that to see, how many we find and what that savings is for the city.
Thank you.
Councilman Schleifer.
Yeah, I think it's important that the facts of this bill are represented, correctly and accurately. And in response to Councilmember Gray, when he was questioning the increase, you said that it's a little higher and this rate would put us, in the middle of the Maryland's 24 jurisdictions. The reality is a 50% increase is not a little higher, it's a lot higher. And it doesn't put us in the middle. It takes us from, like you had said in your presentation, about 20th place in the state, which the same rate as Baltimore County, which I think is our most important one to compare to the 5th highest in the state. So we're no longer in the middle. We're actually going to be at the top if this were to pass. Anyways, my first question is to the Housing Commissioner. In your bill report, it says in the last line that it helps long-term legacy residents who wish to remain. Can you explain how on this bill, increasing the homestead cap by 50%, which has a greater impact on longer-term residents, how that helps longer-term residents stay in the city?
So overall, it goes to the conversations that we've had with the Finance Department in terms of how this bill ties in with the larger strategy on overall realizing the rate reduction across the board for residents, which would help them be able to remain. We also know that, in terms of some of the increases, historic increases that you've seen in property values, in terms of where some of the concentrations of long-term residents, that they are in that some of those areas where, as Director Senemy just said, like even the round 2 that just went through the assessment that just saw the 10% increase, it still would allow them to be able to have the homestead tax credit in place, but also to have the rate reduction overall that they will see, the overall rate reduction that they're able to see on the property tax credit.
But a bill report from an agency isn't a political document. It should be like the facts. Here is what the impact could be or may be, and here's what you should know. You're mentioning things that have absolutely nothing to do with the proposal before us. The proposal before us is, do we raise the homestead cap 50%? And so people who have a large gap still, and it's very easy for people to look up if they're one of them. You go online, you can see your property tax bill. You could actually see other people's also if you want. And you can see what that gap is. And I did that exercise, and there's a lot of people who have a huge gap. And so I don't understand how your report is saying that this does anything for long-term residents when those are the people most impacted. This other proposal, which is external from this bill, is being done on the backs of longer-term residents who typically see your property values grow over time. So if you've been in your property for 10 years, it's not unheard of to see tremendous growth. We hope that people see growth, and we've seen that growth, which is great. We're on the right track. But your bill report does not reflect the actual bill.
I'm gonna actually, because that.
So on the idea of this gap, we did look at that data, and the gap is not as large as you would describe. You're describing a situation where somebody bought a home for $100,000. Everybody, there's all this development around them. Their property value grew significantly in value over time. The data doesn't play that out. We had one period over 20 years ago where there was a significant run up in property values. And then again, the 4 assessment periods after that were declines in real estate value. So there was the run up, but then there was a significant decline. And we saw over time that fewer and fewer and fewer people benefited from the homestead tax credit. So you can always find an outlier out there, but again, the data doesn't just that. One other thing is that when the property sells, it resets. So, when we look at the data, you do see some people have owned a property for a long period of time, but there's a natural turnover in properties as well, and that resets And so and at that point, there is no gap. It resets to that beginning point of where your assessment is when you buy the home. So, we have looked at that. I remember our conversation from last week, and we did look at that. And I'm happy to share some of that data with you to show that the gap is not as large as you would think. I mean, we found on average, you might have about a $10,000 gap between the actual assessed value and where the homestead is currently. And when we ran that through our models, it really doesn't make as much of a difference. The big difference in this, again, I'll repeat this again and again. The driving factor in this is very high assessment growth. That's the driver. It's not whether you're a legacy homeowner or not a legacy homeowner. The big factor that drives how this will work out for you in the long term is the growth in your property value. And again, we think we can mitigate that because if we see that high growth, we have the flexibility to move the rate. And there's a natural turnover of folks. If you sell your property and move in, there's no gap. You're starting from the beginning again. And there's a lot of people whose gap is zero. There's a lot of people whose gap is only $1,000 or $2,000 because they've only been through one cycle of growth. So
there's only one way to know because each of those 50,000 owner-occupied residents that are currently benefiting from this homestead tax credit, there are 50,000 different examples. So you can't run a high-level formula and know how this is going to impact your elderly neighbor next to you unless you look at that data, which is what I had asked for, which is the data that I still don't have, is an address by address, not for this coming year, because I understand the increase that we're seeing right now and that you're offsetting a little bit of it, but in your own presentation, there's a $4.5 million that's coming from this increase.
Right.
People, there's residents who are covering that $4.5 million spread. And so I understand you're saying it's not going to have that much of an impact on so many people, but there's the facts remain that typically when the longer you stay in your house, the increased real estate values increase over time.
Not necessarily. We've had declines in the last 20 years. That's not true.
You've had one-off declines, but in the last year,
Not
what was it,
one-off. We had 4 straight years.
it was a 17.5
Not
increase.
one-off. We had 4 straight years of declines.
There was.
Okay, guys, I need one at a time. We're going to go with the councilman is going to finish the statement, and we're going to get right back to you for your response. Thank you.
The only way for you to know the actual impact is by looking at case by case over these 50,000 residents. Mark my words, I guarantee you there is going to be a lot of residents that in a few years from now, because of this cap being raised, and it compounds, there's a significant difference. For every $100,000 of assessed value difference, when you factor, and I did this math with you, the compounding difference, I think it came out to like $31,000 increase over 10 years on 100,000. And that equates to another over $600 per year difference between the 4% and the 6% on $100,000 of assessed value. So if somebody has a property that's worth $200,000, that would be a $1,200,000 difference, $1,200 difference. And the savings of $50 is a very minute savings for some people while costing other people a tremendous amount. And so my request, and it's gonna still be my request, is to have the data, the same way you have the data by address for all of these residents, that you don't just look at 1 year where you found hundreds of outliers, where you look at multiple years ahead.
We can't look at multiple years ahead because we don't have the assessment data.
But you could look at what the gap is for long-term homeowners. I did it for a lot of people who are in this room right now, and I found that there's some people who are sitting right here looking at me right now who's have a huge gap between what their current tax rate is versus their assessed value. And that is in all parts of town. And so I did that with one of my colleagues last night on the phone, and we found a lot of residents in East Baltimore who have a huge gap based on them living next to developments. So if you don't do that exercise, in a few years from now, we are going to have potentially thousands of people who are going to see increases, so that so that some new homeowners can see a slight reduction. And the point is, the reduction can happen anyways. Instead of the administration absorbing half the cost of the program, they can absorb the full cost of the program if they want to do it. That's the reality. My second question is for the law department. There's an AG opinion on tax credits, especially ones that are for select few people. And so is it legal to even have tax rates vary on the same property based on who's living in it?
Desiree Lucky on behalf of the Law Department. I would need to take a look at that AG opinion and compare it to the legislation that we're looking at today and any potential amendments to that to be able to assess.
All right, I'll get your email address after and I'll forward it to you.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Do we have any additional committee questions or brief comments?
Yes.
VP Middleton, you're going to close us out.
Just to reiterate again how important the outreach is as we keep talking about. And I just want to say for my part, there are certain things that I do as a council member every year and for my community, like I give an older adult symposium at the Vollmer Center. I'm going to be doing that again, and that's a good forum to approach. Also, we all have nonprofits that do economic development activities because they're responsible for certain boundaries. Something comes to mind for me, Park Heights Renaissance. They can assist, and we also have a library system that does events that can help. So those are some things that I think on our end of how we can really work on this outreach, and just want to make sure that some kind of way your office contacts each one of us and we can just give you dates of things that we think, and where there's a good amount of people that would be interested in knowing about this and learning what to do.
Yeah, we'd love to have that and work with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Middleton. We're going to move into, and welcome to Councilman Glover. We're going to move into public testimony at this time. Earlier, we checked. We did not have anyone signed up. If there is anyone who would like to testify on this bill, if you can come to the podium at this time. Okay. And we do not have anyone at this time from the public who is willing to, not willing, but that is here to testify today. It was very important for me to prioritize this hearing due to the timelines based on many of the questions that were posed, and I appreciate the conversation between our agencies as well as the committee members. But I am going to go ahead and recess this hearing. I do think that it's important that we are responsibly advancing bills, and historically, when we come down to tax credits, we are not typically, and I don't like the word rushing, but this is not typically done in one session in a few weeks. So we're going to recess this hearing, and we're going to take a brief 3-minute break, and then we're going to go into our legislative oversight hearings. Okay, everybody, welcome back to the Budget and Appropriations Committee. I need everyone to quiet down. We're going to be starting this hearing. Good morning. This is our quarterly budget briefing for the purpose of calling on representatives from our finance departments, Bureau of Budget and Management Research, the Department of Planning, and Baltimore City Public Schools to provide a briefing to the City Council on the financial performance and level of spending against the approved budgets. We're going to get right into a presentation from BBMR that's going to be given from Director Larson.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you so much for the opportunity to appear before you this morning to provide an update on our quarterly forecast for the current fiscal year, fiscal 26. I do want to note that I am joined with the Assistant Budget Director from my team, Pedro Aponte, who will help me answer any of your questions. So we'll go ahead and dive into the slides. So again, we are here today to present our forecast for the city's general fund based off of actuals from July 1st through December 31st. Based off of our analysis, the city's general fund is projecting a $19.6 million overall surplus. At the first quarter, we were projecting a small overall deficit. So between the first and second quarter, what has really changed is that our revenue outlook has improved to a $48.1 million surplus. That's a 1.8% variation. Most of that variation is due to actual trends around the income tax and property tax revenue that I'll talk about in a couple of minutes. Our expenditure deficit has also grown since the first quarter. At the first quarter, we were projecting a $12.4 million deficit, whereas in the second quarter, we're projecting a $28.5 million deficit. That equates to about 1.1% variance. One of the things that I want to be very clear about as we go through these numbers, and I'll continue to reiterate, is that these numbers do not capture any anticipated or projected costs associated with the winter weather in January. We are working with our agency partners. We're tracking those costs using a specific cost tracking code within Workday and currently monitoring additional contractual costs and payroll costs associated with the event. And we'll be able to incorporate those numbers and come back to provide a briefing to you regarding those costs as part of our third quarter projection. We're closely evaluating those numbers to understand whether or not they can be accommodated within the anticipated surplus for fiscal 26, or if the city will have to look to other tools, perhaps the rainy day fund, as a way to absorb those costs. But again, just want to be very clear that we have not incorporated any of those costs in these numbers. So what I'd like to do is begin by talking about our revenue forecast. So as I mentioned, our revenue forecast has improved since the first quarter. We are anticipating a $48.1 million overall surplus. When we look at our income tax projection, that is a improvement over the first quarter, and that is based off of additional income tax receipts and payments that we have received from the state since we completed our first quarter review. Our property tax projection is also improving, and most of the change between the first and second quarter is related to assessed value tied to the personal property tax, specifically the utility component. Our transfer and recordation taxes are still projecting a deficit overall, but are an improvement compared to our first quarter projection. And our analysis here does not assume any additional revenue from some of the citywide fee and fine increases that were part of the budget balancing package for fiscal 26. This table here just shows you the projected surpluses and revenues based off the categories for general fund revenue. And so now what I'll do is I'll walk through each of the sources that have major variation. I'd like to begin by talking about income tax. So income tax is the second largest revenue stream in the city's general fund. In fiscal 26, we projected just under $494 million in income tax revenue, but we are projecting just under $555 million. That results in a $61 million surplus. There's a couple of factors here that are resulting to this overall projected surplus. Number one, the overall growth in income tax cash available for disbursement statewide is higher than what we had projected in the budget. And we're also seeing that city residents are representing a growing share of the overall statewide tax base for income tax. So those two factors together are contributing to this growth. I think it's also important to remember our discussions and deliberations about the fiscal 26 budget last spring. So when these numbers were finalized last March, April timeframe, we were using projections from the state of Maryland that were assuming essentially no growth with the anticipation of a major drop-off due to layoffs in the federal workforce. And what we're seeing is that instead of staying flat, we're actually seeing growth that has matched prior periods, which is contributing to this surplus. So let's kind of break down each of those components. So the first is the growth assumptions. And so again, this is a revenue stream that's collected by the state of Maryland and then dispersed back to local jurisdictions based off of an allocation formula. And so we work closely with our state partners to understand what we should be forecasting for overall growth. So as part of the budget assumption, like I said, they were assuming relatively flat growth year over year. And so we had assumed 2.4% overall growth for fiscal 26. What we saw through the first quarter was that growth was trending towards 5.3%. And what we've seen in the second quarter is that the actual growth was closer to 6%. And so instead of seeing this major contraction and a drop off in income tax receipts, we're actually seeing that it's growing about 3 times as high as what was forecasted as part of the budget. The next component as part of our income tax revenue are these non-quarterly disbursements. And that's where we get payments from the state that represents our share of any late filings or any penalties associated with late payments. And through the first half of FY26, we've received 2 of those non-quarterly disbursements. We received 1 in September for $5.3 million, and we received 1 in November for $11.2 million. That payment that we received in September was very out of the ordinary. That's the first time that we have received a September non-quarterly disbursement since 2021. I also mentioned that the city's share of statewide filings is up. And so this table here is demonstrating sort of how that gets calculated. So if we start off by looking at the available cash that is collected at a state level to be dispersed, that number is just under $25 billion. In FY25, our tax base represented 5.6% of that share. So that equated to $411.8 million. In FY26, we see that the share of the city resident share has grown by 0.2% to 5.8%. And so what that equates to is just under $425 million of that overall disbursement. That growth of just 0.2% equates to $13.1 million in additional revenue. So this is a good sign. This shows that the employment market in our city is strong and that our residents are seeing growth in their overall wages, and that follows the trends of relatively low unemployment in the city. There are a couple of other factors here, including fiduciary returns. Those are income tax payments on non-employment-based income. We're seeing that is trending down for the second consecutive fiscal year. And we're also assuming that we will receive an unallocated disbursement late in the fiscal year. That payment comes in June. Last year, that number was very high. What we're assuming for FY26 is that the final disbursement is consistent with the 5-year average, excluding that abnormally high payment in FY25. So let's move on and talk about property tax. This is the largest revenue stream into the city's general fund, representing almost 50% of our revenue. In fiscal 26, we're projecting a $15.1 million surplus or 1.3% variation. The table here is showing the budget versus the quarterly assumption for each of those major components. You can see that most of the deviation is happening on the personal property tax side, specifically around the public utilities. At the first quarter presentation to this body, I presented on the overall growth in terms of taxable base that's being driven by a number of large developments in town. That would be the new T. Rowe Price building in Harbor Point, the 4 MLK building over in the Biopark, and the new Under Armour headquarters in Port Covington. We continue to see the benefit of that assessment change. We'll see that factor into our FY27 budget as well. I do want to note, and you'll see this in a couple slides, that although we're seeing growth in the revenue from these properties, the properties are continuing to receive various tax credits that helped to subsidize the construction of the project in the first place. On the personal property tax side, and this is what changed between the first and the second quarter, is that for our public utilities, which is primarily BG&E, their personal property is getting reassessed on a rolling basis. And so we have seen that their assessments have grown considerably, and so that's resulting in $6.2 million of additional personal property tax revenue. Now moving on to net parking revenue. We are projecting a $1.2 million surplus for this revenue stream. This is driven by a number of factors. The first is related to expenditure costs associated with our parking management fund. And so we're seeing an overall surplus in costs related to contractual services and debt service costs that is helping to support this surplus. We are seeing that parking tax collections, parking fine penalties, and garage revenues are all consistent with our budget assumptions. And we are seeing that the overall number of parking citations continues to improve compared to last year, although the payment level against those citations is trending down. So even though we're issuing more citations, fewer people are paying them. But because we have the penalties turned on right now, when those individuals do start to make those payments, there will be late fees assessed with those. One of the things I do want to note is that meter revenues overall were projected to be about $1.1 million less than the budget assumptions. And that number will likely grow as we do our third quarter projections. And that's another byproduct of the winter storm. We had a period in January and early February where there was no parking on those metered streets or just very little activity. And so we would anticipate that that deficit would tick up a little bit in the third quarter. Next up is transfer and recordation taxes. So this is our first of the revenue streams that have a projected deficit for FY26. In this revenue stream, we're projecting a $2.4 million deficit, or about 2.3% variation. What is happening here is consistent with what I've shared with you previously. We continue to see the overall number of transactions decline, but the value of those transactions grow. And so if we look at this, the first half of the fiscal year in FY26 compared to 25, the number of transactions were down by almost 13%, but the value of those transactions was up by 5.5%. On the recordation tax, we're projecting a $1.8 million deficit. The trends there largely follow what we're seeing on the transfer tax, but do want to note that this is the portion that is subject to any refinancing activity. So if somebody were to refinance their mortgage, they would have to pay a recordation tax. We'll continue to see this number be relatively low while interest rates remain where they currently are. What would change the trend here is that if there was a meaningful reduction in mortgage interest rates, and then if you saw individuals who bought their homes within the last 3 to 4 years come back in the market to try to refinance those loans. Hotel tax revenue is projected to have a $3.7 million deficit, or 13% variation. What we're seeing here is a drop-off compared to where we were 2 years ago, where we had essentially returned to our pre-pandemic levels. What we're seeing based off of the second quarter data is that our occupancy rates are down by about 2.3%, and the average nightly room rate is also down compared to the same period between the two fiscal years. Our partners at Visit Baltimore and at the Convention Center are indicating that this trend follows national trends where we're seeing the product of declines in tourism, specifically international tourism, and we're seeing a number of convention events be canceled as a result to cuts at the federal level. We are seeing that hotel tax receipts that come from short-term rentals, so that would be like Airbnbs, there's no change and those revenues are projected essentially at budget. Next up is our traffic camera program. We're projecting a $4.6 million deficit or 15% negative variance. The deficit is coming from the speed camera component of the program. And again, this is our citywide cameras. This does not include the cameras that are located along the I-83 corridor. As part of the FY26 budget, we made a number of assumptions, first regarding additional revenue that would be realized from redeploying cameras to different locations based off of pedestrian and traffic safety goals. That redeployment has not happened, and we don't believe that that will happen in FY26. The other item that was an assumption in this budget was related to the implementation of the tiered fines. Those tiered fines went into effect at the beginning of October. And what we're seeing in the first 3 months of the program is that over the vast majority of the citations that are being issued from our speed cameras are for the lowest tier of those citations, and that we're seeing a very low number in terms of those citations that are being issued for those higher offense levels. The red light portion of the program is projected to have a $1 million surplus, and that is coming from the deployment of 20 new cameras that went live at the end of FY25. Next up is highway user revenue. This revenue stream is projected to have a $5 million deficit, and this is coming from lower collections at the statewide level that are available to be dispersed back to the local jurisdictions. Again, FY26 is the first of 2 years where we will be receiving our max allocation from HUR at 12.2%. And so what we're seeing here in terms of these overall trends is that the biggest decline is around the corporate income tax level in terms of the formula inputs. And then next up would be charges for service. This revenue stream is projected to have a $4 million deficit. And this is related specifically to an increase to tipping fee revenue that was implemented in October. So as part of our plan for FY26, we had recommended increasing the landfill tipping fee from $60 per ton to $127 per ton. That new rate went into effect in November, and what we saw essentially overnight was that our tonnage that was being collected had dropped by almost 50%. And so while we're not hitting our revenue assumption here, I would contend that that is a good thing because we're seeing less pressure on our landfill, and we knew that our rate was artificially low compared to surrounding jurisdictions, and so what we're seeing is less of that waste coming into the city landfill. And then for our final revenue item, our tax credit program, our tax credits are anticipated to cost $6.2 million higher than what we had assumed in the budget. At the first quarter, I had reported about the impact of the enterprise zone tax credit. There were a number of large credits that were finalized after the budget assumptions that are contributing to a $3.3 million deficit. Between the first and second quarter, we learned about additional costs from the brownfield tax credit, and this was related to some properties that are associated with the casino and how they received the first year of their brownfield credit. So now I'd like to switch gears and talk about what we are seeing in terms of expenditures. So overall, as I mentioned, we're projecting a $28.5 million expenditure deficit. We're seeing that our costs regarding personnel are worsening, and this captures some of the impact of wages and back pay requirements associated with recently ratified union contracts. We are seeing that the vacancy counts in the city continue to improve. We had a 3% improvement compared to the first quarter. Sworn vacancies were the biggest portion of the decline. We saw, and that is the product of BPD starting another recruit class. We are seeing that public safety costs are slightly higher compared to the first quarter, and that is driven by ongoing overtime costs in both departments. And we're going to continue to see that while the departments are running these larger academies to try to resolve vacancies, because right now what we're paying is we're paying the wages for the academy classes, and at the same time we're paying the overtime costs to compensate for the vacant bodies in the shift model. And so we're going to continue to see these higher costs until those recruits come out of the academy and can be incorporated into the daily deployments. I wanted to take a minute and just report out on the overall vacancy trends that we talk about on a quarterly basis. So at the start of January, the city's general fund had just over 1,400 funded vacant positions. That equates to about a 14% vacancy rate. As I mentioned, that was a 3% decline since October of 2025. As I mentioned, the largest improvement that we saw during the second quarter were police officers, where the vacancy count was down by 37. So moving into each of our agencies, we'll start by agencies that have a surplus that's driven primarily by vacant positions. So we have 14 agencies that have a surplus that is primarily coming from vacancies. The vacancies in these agencies accounts for about 20% of those total citywide vacancies. Now we'll move on to agencies that have a significant surplus that's greater than 10%. The first is the Board of Elections with a $2.9 million surplus. This is related to the anticipating timing of the mid-year election costs. We were anticipating that the bulk of those costs will hit in FY27 due to the timing of the election in late June. The convention complex is projected to have a $3.9 million surplus. Now keep in mind the convention complex includes both the convention center and then the revenue sharing payment that we make to CFG Arena. The bulk of the surplus that we're seeing here in the second quarter is coming from that revenue sharing payment with CFG, and that is driven by the admission and amusement tax receipts that are generated by that facility. The Mayor's Office of Employment Development has a $1.7 million surplus. That's consistent with what we had reported in the first quarter, and that's capturing the actual costs associated with last summer's Youth Works program. Now moving on to agencies that are projected at budget. We have a number of agencies with no major variance where they're trending right towards their budget numbers. That's pretty typical for some of our smaller agencies. I'll walk through some of the large items here. The first is Circuit Court, has a $1.2 million projected surplus, and that is coming from the juror stipend allocation trending lower than budget assumptions. The Department of Human Resources has a $1 million projected surplus. That's up from $300,000 at the first quarter. That's being driven by savings on various contracts that are administered by the agency, as well as having a number of high-level positions vacant. The Department of Legislative Reference has a surplus of $164,000. That's up slightly from the first quarter. That is driven by the timing of some of the new position actions that were funded for their FY26 budget, as well as costs, lower than projected costs for the lease at the city's archive space. Next up, the Convention Center Hotel has a projected surplus of just over $500,000. That represents the city's required payment for the sort of the debt requirements associated with the facility. That actual payment for FY26 is lower than our budgeted assumptions. The Mayor's Office of Homeless Services, the overall projected surplus is down compared to the second quarter. That projected projected surplus of $853,000 is driven primarily from contractual costs associated with the city's various shelters and some of our winter sheltering costs. And then finally, for the surplus agencies, the Office of Civil Rights has a $423,000 surplus. Again, that's related to vacant positions and then board stipends. And then the Office of Inspector General has a $100,000 surplus that's related to savings from health insurance, and that's just a product of enrollments within that office. And then finally, the Planning Department has an $83,000 surplus, and that's coming from vacant positions, travel, and professional services. And both of those surpluses are consistent with the first quarter. So now let's move on and talk about agencies with an anticipated deficit. The fire department has a projected deficit of just under 27 million. That's an improvement from the first quarter. We're seeing the ongoing higher overtime costs. A portion of that is related to that academy factor I was describing earlier. We're also capturing the wage increase for fire department members as part of a decision that we just received regarding their wages that went to arbitration. The health department has a deficit of just under $200,000, noting that the department had a surplus at the first quarter of $4 million. What's happening here is that the city has entered into an agreement with city schools for a cost-sharing payment associated with school health services. And so we saw that payment kick in between the first and the second quarter. And the department is working to identify different ways to account for that cost. The Office of the Labor Commissioner has a $245,000 deficit. That's a slight improvement from the first quarter. That's related to ongoing legal fees associated with our ongoing union negotiations. The Mayor's Office of Cable and Communication has a deficit of $215,000. That's essentially consistent with the first quarter. That's related to current staffing levels exceeding what had been assumed for vacancy savings in the agency for FY26. The art and culture grants, which I want to be really clear, is not the same thing as the Mayor's Office of Art and Culture. This is a grant program that provides grants to the Walters, the BMA, the BSO, and the zoo, along with the annual payment to BOPA. We are projecting a $1 million deficit here for FY26. This is related to a late payment to the BMA associated with a prior year grant, as well as the benefit costs that are paid for BMA and Walters Art employees. City Schools is projected to have a $1 million deficit. This is related to funding for pre-K, and this is funding that's part of the state education formula. We were notified about the funding requirement following the adoption of the FY26 budget, which is why it was not part of our budgeted amount. The police department has a $19 million projected deficit. That's up from 16.3 at the first quarter. The deficit is coming from overtime costs as well as a number of terms from the recently ratified contract with the FOP. We're also seeing overages in IT costs and uniform costs. The Department of Recreation and Parks has a $1.1 million projected surplus. That's up from about $375,000 at the first quarter. This is related to facility maintenance spend. The department is reviewing all of those expenditures to determine if they could be funded either by their POS funding from the state or from if they're associated to various capital projects. And then finally, the Sheriff's Office has a projected deficit of $2.3 million. That is coming from overtime costs as well as some unbudgeted spending on wireless devices and printing expenses. Do want to note that we've also factored in the anticipated costs of a pending agreement with the Sheriff's Office union that represents the deputies. And then finally, the Department of Transportation has a $2.2 million deficit. That's being driven by prior year invoicing associated with the traffic camera programming as well as streetlight costs. And just to reiterate, that does not include any winter storm related costs associated with the most recent event in January. So with that, we will open it up for questions. I do want to note that I've been joined by representation from each of the agencies that have a projected deficit so that they can help to speak to issues that the departments are implementing in order to control costs. Agency partners, if you do receive a question that's directed to you, if you can just come up and grab one of the tables up here to take your question.
Okay, we're going to start with fire. So the first question I have is what percentage share is the overtime versus the arbitration, wages, back pay impact?
In terms of having a breakdown of the cost?
Percentage-wise, so say if overtime is 80%, arbitration is 20%.
Yeah. So if we look just at overtime, the department is projected to have a $32.2 million deficit in overtime costs. Now, a portion of that is offset by costs from vacant positions, but as you see by the overall projected deficit, most of that deficit can't be absorbed within the department's overall budget. For a precise response to your question, Chairwoman, I can take that as a follow-up.
Okay, so we can't get percentage-wise, but how, do you have an amount for what the arbitration wage or the back pay impact
Yes, let me get that for you.
is? I'm sorry, I didn't complete my sentence.
Chairwoman, I do not have that precise number in my notes before me, and so I would be happy to provide that as a follow-up that we can get for you relatively quickly after this morning's hearing.
Okay, so we're saying that the overtime is driven by the academy pipeline and vacancies. So is there a date that is forecasted for this to change, to decrease the overtime demand, and this is specifically for fire?
Yeah, I'll start the response and then turn it over to Dr. Hart. We are essentially, if we look at fire staffing for firefighter positions in the fire department, with the academies that are currently running right now, we will be getting back to full staffing. So what that means is the academies that are currently underway, once those recruits come out, we will be fully staffed unless there, is additional turnover within the department. And so, in working with the chief and how to forecast these costs moving forward, I believe that we should be at the high mark here in terms of overtime costs that is associated from essentially this double payment between having folks in the academy and having to backfill shifts associated with those vacant positions. Once we have these additional recruits through the academy, we should be able to see a reduction in that overall callback overtime.
Okay, for fire, I guess I'm looking for what is that date that we're looking to have that OT demand decrease?
I can't give an exact date. What I can tell you is that we have a projected EMS class starting in April at the academy that will greatly help with our EMT and paramedic vacancies. We have an EMT firefighter class starting at the academy in May. So when we look at the time frame of those classes, I cannot give the exact date, but that's what we're looking, that's what we have in the pipeline right now. We have a class that's starting in April, and that will help with our EMS vacancies. And then there's another class starting in May. So I'm thinking at the end of that EMS class, we should start to see a huge difference.
So we could be looking into towards the end of this fiscal year.
Yeah.
For any type of relief on OT from our fire department, so we can be expecting.
Yeah, I don't see this trend going down for the remainder of FY26. Unless in order to see a reversal of the trend, the department would have to consider service reductions.
So, Director, we're here. We're constantly here with our public safety agencies, and I'm really not trying to belabor this. But knowing that we're back in the same place that we were when we were going in budget season, in the same place that we were pretty much as the past year. So, what type of overtime governance is going to be put in place to reduce these numbers? Like, what is the agency and BBMR going to do differently than what's been done before, what's been promised to or committed to us in the past?
So there's a staffing level, an assumption that is funded as part of the budget. And then, if the agency implements a staffing level that is higher than what was in the budget assumption, there's little that I can do as the city's budget director to stop that spending. And so I believe that, in response to your question, a portion of that is driven by the administration and sort of what controls are being put in place in terms of how agencies are making determinations about changes to their service levels. For example, one of the items that is contributing to the fire department's overtime deficit is the implementation of the battalion tech program. That is a program that had been requested for funding in multiple budget cycles. It was not funded, and the department continues to implement it through unbudgeted overtime. And so if we want to see a situation where we are not talking about a $30 million deficit for the city's fire department, then we have to look at either how do we cut back service, or how do we accept that they're going to spend more and then fund them at a higher level in the budget process. What I can tell you is that for FY27, we're currently having that debate about some of these unbudgeted factors in the department's budget to figure out what where the administration wants to land in terms of the budget balancing plan for FY27 and how it would incorporate those costs.
What I can say is that fire is internally putting some strategies in place for our overtime mitigation, and that has to do with everything from our staffing and recruitment. And as we spoke of, we have changed the way that we hire and the classes that we have, whereas before there were sporadic classes. Now we're trying to keep them coming through the academy regularly. We've put some strategies in place to help us internally with there's a nationwide paramedic shortage. So what we've done is we've started partnerships with community colleges and different partnerships so that we can help or assist our internal EMTs with becoming paramedics. And then that would cut down on the cost of overtime for staffing with paramedics. Of course, there's other operational adjustments that we have in place, and that's with our private or BLS ambulance service that we're also partnering with. So that is assisting us. We've also put some, we're working on our data analytics and our tracking tools. So we've created an internal fiscal stat. So we're using that time to take a look at our funds and take a look at the spending, take a look at the overtime. We're making sure that we're performing audits internally, and that stat will help us identify if there are any inefficiencies or patterns of abuse. We're looking at things of that sort. We have a new overtime monitoring system, a dashboard that we're using internally. We're meeting internally regularly, and we're taking a look at the overtime costs to try to make some informed decisions on what else we need to do internally to try to mitigate these costs. So we are stepping things up internally to meet about this and to take a look at where we are, and we're monitoring these costs regularly.
Due to time, I'm going to follow up offline on some of these questions. Councilman Schleifer.
Thank you. Laura, just an hour ago, we heard from Bob that as we see property tax and other tax revenues increase, we should expect to see further decreases. And so on the property tax slide and the income tax slide, between the two, we're projected at over $75 million surplus. So wouldn't this cover the entire, the 1.99% tax proposal? Why can't you just take $4 million of the 75 and not take it out on legacy residents?
Well, I think because we are forecasting the strength here is part of the reason that he alluded to why we feel strongly that we can accommodate a property tax reduction plan as part of FY27 under the assumption that these, our two largest revenue streams are strong and we show signs of ongoing growth. The simplest term to your question about why we couldn't turn around that $75 million in terms of tax relief today is because we have overspending within our agencies. And until we can align, either we have to make that decision. Do we want to control our spending to be within these numbers, or do we want to fund some of these higher service levels that we're seeing in terms of some of the agencies where we would need to divert some of this future revenue to expanding services in various agencies?
So the whole talking point about if we see growth, we're going to see further reductions in property tax. That's only if every single agency and overall we have reductions. I mean, that was kind of left out of the talking points. I mean, that's a lot of cards that have to fall in line in order for property owners who are going to see this $4.5 million tax increase next year for them to start seeing any relief whatsoever if it's based on every single agency getting reductions. I mean, that's kind of concerning. I mean, I would assume that when you were seeing a projected $75+ million surplus on these property tax and income tax, that certainly we could, afford to, stomach another $4 million of that so that we don't have to pass a bill raising taxes on our residents. But my second question is regarding the traffic camera program, where we're seeing a deficit. What's the overall cost of the program versus the revenue?
So if you bear with me, I can get that cost. Pedro, do you have that revenue number right in front of you? So I'll have Pedro start off by talking to us about the revenue number.
Pedro Ponte, Assistant Budget Director. We are looking right now for traffic cameras only on the city, no including 83, about $10 million.
$10 million in revenue? And that's as of this quarter?
Yeah, that's a projection for this quarter, yeah.
Okay, so that's For the first half of the year?
No, that's a projection with assessment with data as of the first half of the year. What we have collected as of now, I can tell you that number, but what I'm telling you is the projection for the end of the fiscal year.
Okay, and what's the cost on that?
And the cost to administer the program is 16.5 million.
Yikes. So as of right now, we're losing $6 million to charge our residents $10 million?
Well, I would contend that the goal of the traffic camera program is not to generate revenue, but to help contribute to positive pedestrian and traffic safety outcomes.
Gotcha. So we're losing $6 million, hoping for that positive outcome?
Based off of the FY26 budgeted amounts and the anticipated revenues.
Okay, I think it'd be more positive to just scrap that and take that $6 million and just lower the property taxes instead of affecting our legacy and long-term homeowners. You know, for all these other projects and programs that we're trying to do, that's quite concerning. So is this $6 million, is this just a quarter two shortage, or this is an overall annual deficit?
That would be annualized because the revenue number that Pedro is sharing is the projected revenue, and I'm sharing the annualized budget as well.
Gotcha, okay. And how many years have we been doing this program for? It's been a while, right?
I know we're,
Since 2017. Yeah.
2017? Yes. Okay. So, okay. So we've been going 9 years and we're losing a bunch of money. That doesn't sound like a good business model, but I'll pass it on to the chair. Thank you.
As a follow-up, quickly, it seems like every time we're in these quarterly hearings that the goalpost is just moving on when this deployment is going to happen. And this time we heard from you that it's not going to happen this fiscal year. Can you tell me why? And just keep in mind, the time before it said, hey, we were looking to do it this state. The time before it was we were looking to do it this state, and now we're saying, hey, we're not doing it at all. And this is specifically regarding the speed camera deployment. So what happened this time? And I know you're the director of BBMR, but what happened was that for DOT to say?
do you want to speak to that, or do you want to start, Pedro?
I can start. So there are operational constraints for relocations. When we build the budget, we assume certain number of relocation, but the number of areas where the school districts are limited. So there is no room for start moving these cameras and the frequency that we would like to see.
Here, Pedro.
But I will definitely welcome the opinion of Mr. Philip, because there are operational constraints as well that limit that.
Okay. Okay. From a budget perspective, the speed monitoring program is managed with fiscal discipline and overall operational oversight. I'm sorry. Good afternoon. I'm sorry, Madam Chair and council members. My name is Philip Mellerson. I'm the Director of Automated Enforcement for the Department of Transportation. Revenue projections are based off historical trends, seasonal patterns, and known variables. Automated enforcement revenue can fluctuate due to improved driver compliance, weather conditions, school calendar variations, construction impacts, and legislative changes throughout the year that affect citation volume. Citation issuance remains consistent with historical trends and the averages, and the system uptime continues to meet contractual standards operationally, and the program performs with expected benchmarks. Camera relocations are strategically planned using crash data, speed studies, and traffic volume analysis and documented safety needs. Locations are evaluated on a recurring basis, And when conditions change, placement is adjusted and ensure enforcement relocations and resources are aligned with areas presenting the
So,
greatest
sir,
safety risk.
I hate to cut you off. We're behind, and I know that's not your fault.
No problem.
But the question is, why does the timeline keep shifting on when these deployments are going to happen? So this is, I don't know, maybe the fourth time that the director has came in here and said that we're going to delay moving these cameras. So we don't need the background, we just need to know why are we saying for this year, this fiscal year, nothing is happening. We're not deploying these to new locations, that's it.
Last year, just in general, we had over 20 relocations, and there's a plan to have over 25 relocations this year as well. I don't think there's been a delay in the relocations.
There's definitely a delay. We've been here 3 times before, and we've been given dates, and they should have happened by now. And now we were just told that it's not going to happen this fiscal year. So if you know something different, like when are you guys going to redeploy these speed cameras?
Well, we plan on moving at least 15 cameras in the spring. And we also have on the list to move 6 cameras within the upcoming 2 weeks. Harford Road and Argonne Avenue.
Okay, can we, as a committee request, can we just get you guys' timeline and the locations when they're going to be moved and where?
Yes.
I appreciate it. You had a we're going to do a follow-up by Councilman Schleifer, then we're going to get to Councilman Gray.
Thank you. And Philip, a part of the statement you're reading, we've heard before multiple times, and it alludes to the fact that there's some type of like data being used to choose locations, which we have first-hand experience to know that that's just simply not the case. We've requested numerous times the camera data. We were promised this from not only DOT, but also the vendor who just got their contract renewed. And so when could we get the data to show the amount of tickets issued by camera over the past year, this past year? When can we get that data?
Yes, I can get that to you by the end of the week, sir.
You're gonna get me the data from every single camera by location and how many tickets were issued at those locations for the past year by the end of this week?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Councilman Gray.
Thank you. Looking at the charges for service, for the tipping fee, there's a loss of $4 million from what you guys budgeted in the actual projections. I was hoping somebody from DHCD was here because I would love to also know correlating data. Has there been less dumping? Because the argument for this, in part, was if folks come into the city because our tipping fees are significantly less than other jurisdictions, they wait in line, they get upset, and then they will just leave, and on the way out, they'll just dump their illegal dumping just on the outskirts of the city. And as someone who has a road that's on the outskirts of the city, I often see that. And so I wanted to, and I guess I could just make this a committee request, if we can look at year to date, the number of illegal dumping 301 requests from here to now, and to see if not only are we losing revenue, which is a great thing, but if that also correlates with us having less illegal dumping in and around the city. I don't know if anyone here can answer, because I don't think anyone from DHCD is here.
We can take that as a follow-up. I'll just note that most of the drop-off in tonnage came from large haulers, from Waste Management, Republic Service, and Cockies. But which would lead us to believe that they are going to a different landfill versus illegally dumping, their large hauler collections.
Yeah, not them.
But that was where the
transfer
drop-off,
station.
But that was where the drop-off was.
Yeah.
Was in those large haulers. But I would be more than happy to follow up with colleagues in housing to see if there's been a meaningful change in the illegal dumping citation trends.
Okay, so the everyday person that goes and dumps,
That's
they're
not where
tipping.
we're seeing the drop off in the tonnage. Where we're seeing the drop off in the tonnage is from those large waste haulers.
Gotcha. Okay. So you partly answered my question because those are the folks that usually are being labeled as the illegal dumpers, the small haulers, and you're saying that there's no change really in their. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
VP Middleton, did you have any questions? Okay. I want to thank all the agencies who took their time to be with us today for potential questions. We are going to get into our next hearing, which is going to be, I apologize, the same hearing, but our next portion of it, which is going to be the Department of Planning, where we'll be discussing the capital budget. Okay, welcome back to the Budget and Appropriations Committee. We are now going to be moving into a presentation from our planning department where we'll be discussing the capital budget.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, committee members, for inviting us to present on the capital budget. My name is Sarah Parnillum. I am with the Baltimore City Department of Planning, and I am going to share with you information about expenditures for capital projects through Q2 of fiscal year 2026. So we provided to the committee a report that has information for capital projects, not just fiscal year 2020-26 Q2 expenditures, but really gives you a picture of the status of capital projects more generally. So for all projects that are open, that have not yet been closed, we have information on the total appropriations for those projects, the total expenditures, and the total obligations. So that's not just for this quarter, but since those projects were initiated. And then to provide some context for that information, we have included information about recent budgets. So you can see of the total appropriations, how much was appropriated in fiscal year 25, how much was appropriated in fiscal year 26, because we know that there's likely to be less expenditures for those more recently budgeted projects. And then we have information with the total expenditures for fiscal year 25, as well as expenditures this fiscal year through Q2. So that report has details for every project. This is a summary by agency, but it's almost 50 pages long and has every agency with the projects listed there. And so what I'm going to do is just provide some highlights quickly from that report. One of the things that was included in the report is we organize the projects in terms of the status for each project. So you can see what projects are in the initiation phase. These are things that were probably budgeted more recently, what projects are in the design phase, what projects are in the construction phase, and so on and so forth. So we're just going to look at that breakdown by agency, starting with the Department of General Services. So the Department of General Services is responsible for capital projects for many city agencies. They support downtown buildings such as the one we're in right now, as well as the ones in the surrounding blocks, but they also support some of our other agencies such as the fire department, the police department, the health department, the community action centers. And as you can see here, the majority of the funding for capital projects that are in the Department of General Services portfolio are either in the design phase or the construction phase. So you can see in the design phase, there's 9 projects totaling to $62 million. And in the construction phase, there's 16 projects totaling to $68 million. And for an agency such as General Services that is really a construction-focused agency compared to some of the other agencies we'll look at that are more community and economic development, this is what you would expect, that most of the projects are going to be in that pipeline of design and construction. We can compare that to housing and community development. In terms of the way that the accounting is structured, this includes information for both the housing department as well as Baltimore Development Corporation. And so in contrast to the Department of General Services, we see that a majority of the capital portfolio for the Department of Housing and Community Development consists of ongoing programs. So here we're not renovating a building and then renovating another building. We really have ongoing programs, whether that's demolition, whether that's home improvement incentives. We have those programs that receive additional funds every year and continue on the next year. So there's 129 different programs that are funded in Housing and Community Development's portfolio that total to almost $400 million. Information technology is included in the city's capital budget, but it's the smallest participating agency. So here you see that the majority of the projects in their portfolio are substantially complete. One of the things that we are doing is partnering with capital accounting in finance in the Bureau of Accounting and Payroll Services to look at projects that are substantially complete and make sure that we're closing them out. So in future presentations, you will probably see that number go down as those projects are closed and are no longer reflected in this reporting. So some of those may not be ready to be closed yet, but some of them it may be an accounting issue, and we're working with our partners in finance to get those closed out. You'll also see that there's significant projects that are in the construction phase, if you will, for information technology. Obviously, that looks a little bit different than it does for general services when we talk about construction for information technology, but that's the second largest component of their portfolio. Public Works, kind of in contrast to information technology, where we were looking at the smallest agency, here we're looking at the largest agency. DPW includes our utility projects, so water, wastewater, and stormwater are the vast majority of the projects within their portfolio, but it does also include solid waste. Again, here you'll see that the majority of the projects are substantially complete, and while we were looking at numbers in the millions for the other agencies, here we're looking at numbers that are in the billions. So we're looking at 3.7 billion with a B in terms of substantially completed projects within DPW. And so even though the construction number is significantly smaller than the amount that's substantially complete, it still far surpasses the construction that we're seeing in other agencies at $1.6 billion across 57 projects. For recreation and parks, we're seeing a lot of projects that are in the design stage, so we'll be seeing construction in future years, and then we do have a significant amount that is substantially complete. And then for transportation, again, we see a significant amount for both design and substantially complete. Transportation, like the Department of Housing and Community Development, has a substantial number of ongoing programs. So if we think of things like resurfacing, we fund resurfacing on an annual basis. And so that continues and rolls over from one year to the next. Whereas other projects within Department of Transportation, such as a bridge, kind of has a start and a finish. And so you see that kind of going through the design and construction phases. And then lastly, I wanted to highlight that we are working with the Mayor's Office of Infrastructure Development and the Office of Performance and Innovation on establishing capital stat to monitor projects. So we're going to be looking at the status of federal and state grants, looking at project budgets, schedules, and risks. And so we will be able to, in the future, as capital stat advances, we'll be able to share some of that information with this body. And I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have.
How far are you
is the agency in the development of capital status? Is it already stood up? Are you guys still working
They
through?
have not yet had their first meeting.
Okay.
And that's something that the Mayor's Office of Infrastructure Development is leading. So we can, if the council is interested, have them join us for the next one of these meetings, or maybe 2 quarters from now, maybe makes more sense, but.
For the mayor's office, can we make sure that the data is just provided to us when capital stat, when that first meeting is just going to take place, when it starts? The other item is who's going to own it? Is that going to be performance and innovation, or is it going to be the planning department who's going to be in charge of capital stat?
The Mayor's Office of Infrastructure Development is the lead agency for capital stat.
Okay, and you guys are still working this stuff out, but has it been decided already what's going to be provided publicly? Or are you guys still?
I think it's still very much in the beginning stages. I just wanted to highlight that it is something that is planned, but I don't have all those details, and I'm not sure that they've been determined yet.
Appreciate you highlighting. I'm sure that other colleagues outside of me are very interested in it. Councilman Gray? Did you, VP Middleton, any questions?
Clarification. So I saw the slide where you had HCD and also the Baltimore Development Corporation together. Can you just kind of explain that a little bit more? Because BDC is mainly with buildings and businesses.
Yeah.
Explain how you have that and why you put that incorporated together.
The way that the accounts are structured, so the way that the projects live in Workday, which is the city's financial system, is that both Housing and Community Development and Baltimore Development Corporation are part of the same fund. There is a separate cost center for Baltimore Development Corporation, and they do have their own projects. So we could pull them out if you're interested. We can certainly do that, but I was summarizing things kind of at the agency level, and the way it's structured in Workday is they're all together. Baltimore Development Corporation, being a quasi-agency, actually gets my understanding, and I don't know if the law department has left, but that they get their authority through the Department of Housing and Community Development, which is why I believe that the accounts are structured that way. Yeah.
Okay, so we thank you for your presentation, for answering our questions and letting us know about capital stat that will be coming. We are going to move into our next portion of this hearing, which will be city schools. Okay, whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Council Chair and members. My name is Courtney Desabé. I am the Executive Director of Financial Assistance for Baltimore City Public Schools. So I'm going to walk you through our Q2 update. All right. So the first thing we're going to look at is, excuse me, our general fund revenue by source as of December 30th. So generally speaking, being halfway through the year, we're looking at having a percentage balance of somewhere between 40 and 50%. As you know, most of our revenue comes from the state of Maryland, city of Baltimore. That makes up 98% of our revenue. State of Maryland, 72, city of Baltimore, 26. So those are the two major revenue sources. As you can see, with 45.5%, they're right on track for where we would expect them to be for the second quarter of the year. One outlier at this point is our investment earnings, which is higher than what we expected so far this year. We expected that would have gone down from some of the interest rates last year. So we're pleasantly surprised, but we're going to keep monitoring with our investment bankers to see how it looks for the rest of the fiscal year. Here we look at our expenditures by category. This is one of the two ways that we demonstrate the expenditures, the second being by object, so we'll get to that in a second. Looking at it by category, again, there's some things that we expend on blanket contracts. So we do some of those encumbrances earlier on in the year. So you'll see those be expended a little more than what you would normally expect for the second quarter. So for example, our student transportation, operational plans, administration, so some of those items you see in the 30% range, and that's because we front load a lot of our contracts in July when we start the fiscal year. So we start a lot of those encumbrances early so that we can run those invoices as quickly as possible when they come through. But that being said, there's nothing here that's an outlier. There's nothing here that gives us any cause for concern in terms of the pace of our expenditures at a category basis. This view at the object level, which makes a lot more sense, I think, to folks than the category basis. You can see salary and fringe taking up 77% of our budget, which is no surprise. The vast majority of our budget is people, and those are 54% and 38% respectively. So again, we're on pace for where we would expect to be 2 quarters into the fiscal year with regards to expenditures on personnel. The next largest category is contractual services, which is 15% of our general fund budget. That again is on pace, 36.8%, a little bit ahead of where you'd expect with halfway through the year. But again, these are the contracts that we pre-encumber during the course of the year. Materials and supplies is actually spending relatively low compared to where we are in the year. We have 70% still remaining. We would expect that as schools see those balances in their budgets, they're going to reassign them to other areas of need. So we'd expect that to be expended by the time we get to later in the fiscal year. Our last section here is a comparison of the total appropriations and expenditures. Again, looking at where we are in the fiscal year and the range of where we are, we want to be slightly ahead of our expenditures. So we want to make sure that our revenue is coming a little bit faster than our expenditures, which is what we're seeing. We're about $33 million ahead. And again, right on pace for where we would expect to be for this point in the year. So there's nothing here that stands out as worrisome for us. We do have a lot of protections in place for overspending, particularly at the school level. So it's not something that we would expect to see. So we are where we expect to be at this point, halfway through the fiscal year. That being said, we also do a lot of communication with schools as we go through the fiscal year in terms of their OTPS, their other than personal balances. So if we see specific schools have outstanding balances or are looking like they're going to underspend or overspend, we reach out to those schools and communicate with them on getting them on track with their spending. So all things being said, we're pretty happy with where we are 2 quarters into the year. Any questions?
Not for me. You literally answered my question about changes at the school level and how you guys handle it. Do we have any questions from committee members? We do. Councilman Gray.
Thank you. And I'm sure there'll be more deliberative conversations about this. But in looking at your contractual services and or property and equipment, during this snowstorm, I know that the cleanup of sidewalks in and around the property, just another ask to ensure that that is clearly communicated to principals, whoever, that anything that touches the school property is the sidewalk and not just directly in front of the school. Certain schools have a lot of area and, you don't want kids walking on ice and something that you have to do, 2 or 3 days later. But on that, was there anything that North Avenue provided in support to clear those sidewalks, or was that just all up to each individual school's custodian staff, which is generally one person?
Yeah, no, there was a lot of support from central office, from the operations department, to both in terms of personnel and funding and SALT, for the schools during this crisis. So that a lot of that help did come from central office and the operations department.
Yeah, SALT is great. But I'm saying like man hour, like people.
Yeah, people is
okay. All right. Yeah. And then the second one is just a point of contention I have, and I talked to Melissa about this. The DGS heavy machinery equipment was placed at the Edmondson West Side Skills Center. There was a fence put up. There was a banner, so you really can't see inside. No issues. There was barbed wire put up on Emerson Avenue, right across the street from where the kids walk out of. I think that is extremely distasteful. I don't think any kid should have to walk directly out of school on a property that they still attend school at and see the barbed wire. I've asked for a update on what ways can we improve that to change that aesthetically. And so I will actually put that on the record and see if I can get a response in a month to see what actions can be taken step by step so we can alleviate that issue.
Okay, thank you.
We can ensure that you guys will work with
Yes.
Councilman Gray on it. Just to piggyback on one item, when the schools need additional support with clearing the passages on school property, do they reach out to North Ave? Is that the procedure that they reach out to you guys, or are you guys proactively reaching out to the schools?
It's a combination. Usually the area facilities managers from the operations teams are the first folks on site at the schools, usually, even before the principal. So they have a sense of where additional support is needed. One of the, I guess, bumps you could say, as you can imagine, is just kind of correlating who gets support first based on bell schedules and need and all the rest of that. But they do go out in anticipation of, the need to try and assess the different properties in advance of someone requesting it. But it doesn't stop someone, of course, from saying, hey, I do need additional help, because sometimes the help is more personnel related. It's like, my custodian's out or not capable or whatever the case is, so I need like more physical help. So that's different from like, facilities layout type help.
Okay. Thank you both for joining us today and the information that you shared. We are going to be recessing this hearing. Thank you.
Thank you.